All right, I am here with First Sergeant Erik Gordius, who got promoted since that time. But at the time of the deployment, First Sergeant Erik Gordius, I'll give you the floor to explain who you are and what it meant to be a first sergeant. Just tell us who you were at the time of the 22nd.
All right, so first I'd like to start with what it means to be a first sergeant. Of course, everybody has different perceptions and different expectations when moving into a new position. But as a junior enlisted soldier or as a non-commissioned officer progressing up through the ranks, I think almost every career non-commissioned officer aspires to one rank, and that's to be a first sergeant, because that's the first time you have an individual, separate organization. It's kind of like your toy box, you know, your own little fiefdom, if you will. And that sounds melodramatic and egotistical, but that's not the intent. It's because the role of the first sergeant, if I can go off into that just a little bit.
Yeah.
The role of a first sergeant is, you know, set clear boundaries, maintain good order and discipline, look out for the welfare of soldiers, hold soldiers accountable, and get a little tough with them sometimes. And then even when things aren't looking so good, you have to advocate for the soldiers in your command. And that's what I mean by your own fiefdom. The German army calls the first sergeant position the father of the company. And I always took that to heart when I was a platoon sergeant in Germany. I always thought, yeah, that not everybody likes their parents, but at some point in your life, you tend to look back and say, okay, they weren't that bad after all, you know? So being a first sergeant in the 22nd was the most. I mean, I went on to serve as a command sergeant major in a multifaceted engineer battalion. I worked on general officer staffs, but being a first sergeant in the 22nd for that year was the most complicated, exhausting, challenging, just fatiguing and tiring. I know it's all a different way of saying exhausted, but the single most rewarding position I've ever served, because I was surrounded by, when we deployed, I believe we had up to 147 soldiers, and you'll hear throughout all the other interviews and throughout reading this great production that Joey's putting together, you'll hear all the harrowing experiences, and I, as a first sergeant, you get to sit and watch the soldiers do those. And I never once, well, one time, but that's a non-issue. But out of 300 days of being in the company deployed, and oh gosh, hundreds of missions, well over 1,000 missions, no soldier except for one ever said, "I'm not going to go out and do this job." And even the guys that were wounded, you know, slipped through the cracks if they could. No, I'm good. No, you're not. But so being surrounded by that caliber of man every single day, that's what keeps you up when you're up for 18, 19, 20, 21 hours a day. Not riding around in a vehicle looking for bombs and getting shot at, but trying to monitor 2, 3, sometimes 4 elements on the battlefield. That's what was exhausting, keeping tabs of what's going on, and then of course trying to make sure they had all the resources back in the fob when they came back, being marginally successful at best because of some limitations. We did, I think as a company, we did something that no one had done prior to or since, and I know we'll talk more about that later. But being a first sergeant in the 22nd is the single most rewarding position I've ever had, except for father and parent, or father and husband, and now grandfather. But it was humbling and just awesome. And as we progress through the discussion, I think you'll get a better understanding what I mean by that.
Okay.
But as Erik Gordius, if I can go into that right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my dad was a hardworking guy. He was very successful. I had two brothers, two sisters. I grew up in New England, Maine, Mass, New Hampshire. Every time my dad got promoted, we'd move. So and he was doing very well in his profession. And I remember I'd come home from school as a little kid, and I'd take out the encyclopedias and I'd read about World War II. And World War II was my favorite war to read about. There was some information about the Korean War. The World War I wasn't as big a volume. And then, of course, that was mid 1970s, so there was nothing in the encyclopedia about Vietnam yet. But World War II, just watching what soldiers did, I just knew I was going to grow up and join the army. And for some reason, that just always stayed in the back of my mind. I wish I could say it inspired me to be a great athlete and get good grades and all that good stuff, but it didn't. I was a annoying, troublemaking, ne'er-do-well teenager that was going nowhere fast, and actually was in danger just because of non-participation, was in danger of failing out of high school. And then my senior year, I saw a young lady walking through the cafeteria, and I said, "Who the heck is that?" The guy told me, and I said, "I'm going to marry her." Well, I did. About a year and a half later, and right after when I was dating, she kind of got my head on a little straighter. And I told her, I said, if we're going to stay together, I'm going to join the army. And I had long hair and listened to heavy metal and did stuff I shouldn't have done. And she said, okay. So we got married at 17, joined the army, and wow, 17, that was 1988. And then 2011, a short 23 years later, we landed in Afghanistan. So yeah, the whole time was active duty. My children were both born into the military. My children both completed high school while I was still in the military. So you see a lot, experience a lot, and learn a lot, and make a lot of mistakes over a 31-year career. And I wish I could say, gosh, we all strive to be perfect and we get close, but a lot of us make mistakes, and I'll actually, throughout this, I'll talk about some of the mistakes I made as well. Good intention as I was, still, I made some pretty boneheaded mistakes, but nothing serious. But you learn from those mistakes, and I think that's why I decided to stay in longer, because normally about 20 years you're thinking about getting out of the army, and I just made E8, hadn't had an opportunity to be a first sergeant, and I was given that opportunity in another company, and I was pretty doggone excited. And luckily, that was a good organization. If I can, real quick.
Yeah, it's your time. Oh yeah,
Fido. That was the first company I was a first sergeant in, and it was a good bunch of guys, and actually quite a bit of them served with us in Afghanistan. That's a whole different story. But we had quite a bit of success over there, and there were some instances or some conditions in the 22nd that required a new first sergeant. So I had the opportunity to, while we were out in Yakima, I got selected to move over to the 22nd, and yeah, I'll save specifics for any follow-ups. But when I walked into the 22nd, I was devastated. I thought, oh my gosh, we're never going to get ready to go to war. Yeah, and not because of the quality of anything. It was just the alien environment to what I just left. I had just spent a year with my commander and building a new team after the battalion had deployed. We built it all back up with new soldiers and importing new NCOs and young officers. And then I said, oh, we finally get to a point where we can sit back and make fine-tune adjustments. And then the next day I woke up and I was in the 22nd and said, oh, wow, I'm starting all over again. And I didn't know any of y'all from Adam. And that was in, gosh, dog. That was late 2010, I believe. And yeah, it was. And then less than a year later, we deployed. And we got a heck of a lot done in a very short period of time.
Yes. So one of the things,
a little
no,
on that one.
Not at all. This is your time. And I really, that's what I want is I want you to talk about all your memories and everything. I did want to follow up on something you had said. You said I cared to follow up on the specifics of some of the things that happened early on in the company. I'd love to go there because it gets into our name, the Hooligans. And I mean, what was the setting early on? What did you walk into?
All right, so the Hooligans had a reputation of and obviously I'm not going to use names for anything that could be perceived as negative. But there was the backstory is the 14th Engineer Battalion, Rugged Battalion, which had its own unique reputation. But the Rugged Battalion had just redeployed in 2009. During that time, when they were deployed, I was up in the 555th Engineer Brigade staff, and we were all deployed together to Iraq. So when the battalion and brigade headquarters redeployed in 2009, traditionally after a deployment, a lot of soldiers and leaders scatter. They go on to their next assignment. They catch up on stuff that they couldn't do while they were deployed, to go to schools, things like that. So that's the backdrop. Well, while that was unfolding and the redeployment was happening, I'm sorry, while the deployment was happening, the 22nd Clearance Company was stood up, and the young captain and the first sergeant didn't have enough personnel, barely had any equipment, but they went out and they bought all these cool GI Joe toys, thermals and neat attachments for weapons. So they were kitting the soldiers out. They didn't have any trucks to ride around in, but they had really cool whiz bang M4 or AR4s. I'm sorry, not AR4s, M4s. And there was all kinds of cool equipment that was purchased, but nothing that the unit needed. Didn't buy radios, didn't buy engineer specific equipment. So anyways, so when I had come over to the 22nd, I was dropped off, and the first thing it was inside the base camp that 22nd had established at Yakima Training Center, and the vehicle pulled in. I climbed out, and the first thing I saw was a very overweight soldier with no shirt on, giving himself a bath in the middle of the unit area. I said, "What the heck's going on?" Okay. So I walked in to the command tent, and all the senior leadership of the company was sitting in the command tent. And they had their blouses off and they're wearing t-shirts. The exercise was pretty much over, and we were just getting ready to go back to Joint Base Lewis McChord. And everybody was kind of winding down a little bit. And I walked in and I met the commander. "Hey, I'm your new first sergeant." He says, "Hey," we chatted for a couple seconds, and traditionally at that point you would get everybody's attention and say, "Hey, everybody, this is the new first sergeant," and then you do the introductions. And he's like, "All right, cool. You want a cup of coffee?" And I said, "No, I'm good." And he walked out. And I said, "All right." So I just sat down, and I'm listening to the conversations and just trying to assess the personalities of the people in the tent. And I was thinking, wow, these guys. The training event for the 22nd had not gone that well, and none of the equipment was ready to drive the. How many hours was it back to JBLM? It was basically an all-day convoy to get back there. And none of the equipment was staged. None of the equipment was ready. And everybody's just sitting around acting like they just won the Super Bowl. So that I had to introduce myself to the company. Like, "Hey, everybody, how you doing? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" And that was my introduction to the 22nd. So fast forward a little bit, we get back to Joint Base Lewis McChord, and I walked into the first sergeant's office, and I just kind of wanted to see any outstanding actions, maybe some folders on the desk or something, because the first sergeant left rather unexpectedly. I don't think he was expecting to leave that quickly. And I opened the bottom right drawer of the desk, and there was a stack about 18 inches deep of folders. And I started flipping through the folders, and it was positive urinalysis, failed physical fitness tests, failed height and weight, body composition. Soldiers were over body fat. Counselings for all manner of poor activities, poor behavior. And I thought, wait a minute, I just seen the legal tracker. So I went down through and I had access to the system where I could look up soldiers' names. And I started flipping through, and none of the soldiers that were listed here had ever had any personnel action. And I looked and I counted up, there were 12 positive urinalysis tests with no action taken. There were multiple failed APF physical fitness tests with no action taken. And I said, oh my gosh, what have I gotten into? So that was my first week in the 22nd. I couldn't even, at that point, I don't think I remembered all the platoon sergeants' names off the top of my head. And my way of introducing myself in depth to the platoon sergeants, who, by the way, were all phenomenal non-commissioned officers. It was not their fault. My way of introducing myself to them was telling them I'm going to have to start separating some of their soldiers from the army. And that was a list of first activities I had in the unit. Like, hey, I'm sorry, he's a great dude, but he has to go. So that was not a very endearing. It wasn't a way for me to endear myself to the leadership of the 22nd. I started snatching out some of their quote good soldiers, and then over time they kind of realized, well, good soldiers don't necessarily do meth and cocaine and things like that. So that was my way of getting into the nitty gritty of the company. You know, usually when you dig out the rot, what's left is solid. And that's what I found with the 22nd. Once we took those soldiers and got rid of the ones we could relatively quickly that really didn't want to be there anyways. So we did it was our responsibility and our duty to do it. Nobody likes separating soldiers from the army, or you shouldn't. And it actually takes a toll on you. But once you purge the trouble, it tends to kind of allow fresh air in. And I started almost immediately seeing young faces that were kind of upset at first that their buddies were leaving. They started looking around saying, wow, everybody's here on time in the morning now. Wow, we can, yeah, cool. So we don't have to go look for somebody every single morning. Or you go out on a run and you realize, wow, nobody's falling out. The whole unit finishes close to being together. And so that the little things like that actually turn into bricks, and you start building that foundation. And it was as the first sergeant, I already talked about the fact, the father of the company role and all that, just observing and kind of keeping goalie, keeping everybody on the field. You start watching the platoons kind of come together as elements. And that was another thing that I tried to do. That it was the 22nd was made up of 4 platoons, 4 base platoons plus headquarters. But you look around, it was 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Those were the engineer clearance platoons, and then there was a support maintenance platoon, and then a headquarters platoon. And it was really just one amorphous blob of people. Everybody had friendships across, which is great. It's a tight organization. The problem is when you're in war, you don't rely on the person. If you're in 1st platoon, you don't rely on the person in 3rd platoon. You rely on the person in your squad and in your platoon. So that was one of my first efforts that I put a lot of energy into, was pulling the platoons apart. And one of the ways that I did that was targeting. I target a good non-commissioned officer, a young Sergeant Wardell, for example, and just try to have an isolated discussion with them, and then make a comment, plant a seed, reference another NCO in that platoon. And it's not manipulate. Well, I guess it is manipulation, but it's positive manipulation. And you might comment on another non-commissioned officer that did something great, and you say, geez, you think you could take him? He just, I don't know, he just ran 10:45 in the 2 miles. You ran 11:10. 25 seconds is a big gap. And then you watch 2-3 months later, when the next APFT happens, the next physical fitness test happens, the one you talk to runs it at 10:38. And you say, aha, got him. And I'm not getting any personal gain out of it, but it's these little toys on the field that you're trying to just point in the right direction. And the 22nd had a reputation, and I'm sorry, the term hooligan. Yeah. So, have you described the history of the hooligan and the gopher yet, Joey?
Yeah, there was this ugly gopher they wanted to design with. Pull Isle gave the history for that. And
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. And then when we killed him, it became the logo for your for the.
So that wasn't said, that was
Oh,
supposed to be, yeah. So please share
yeah.
that.
So yeah, the hooligans of the 22nd Clearance Company were, I don't want this to sound overly negative, were, if outside of the battalion, they were viewed as the dregs of the battalion, the unwanted, the unwashed, the unclean, et cetera, whatever description you want to give. And it was based purely out of hearsay and some activities of the then company leadership. So that was my experience going in. I just knew the 22nd from arm's length. Once I got in there, I realized, okay, well, yes, a small population, that description fits. But there's a lot of people here that just don't know what the hell they're doing because they haven't had an opportunity to do anything. And all we did, Captain Lau and myself, because shortly after I arrived, Captain Dan Lau arrived, all as a company commander. All we did was sit and talk and say, let's take the shackles off the platoons. They need to go out and train independently. So we helped them set up platoon training. We didn't do company ranges that much or company training events that much. We shoved the platoons out and then watched them from a distance to let them go out there and train. Now, some platoons did better than others. Some platoons excelled in different areas. But we kept tabs, hey, these guys developed tactical expertise. These guys developed fitness better. This platoon came together and everybody knows everything about each other and the other stuff will come. So it was a little bit of everything happening across the company. So the name Hooligans was actually being kicked around up in our headquarters and battalion and brigade headquarters. They wanted to mandate a change in the name, because the soldiers of the 22nd no longer had a bad reputation. And it was probably about 4 months after I got there. And I told them, I said, if you want to see a mutiny, you try taking away the name Hooligans. Because even a soldier that just won the non-commissioned officer of the quarter board or scored 300 maximum on the physical fitness test or shot 39 out of 40 on the range or something like that, they wore the title Hooligan with pride. Mm-hmm. And that was, it's like, a pirate being proud of being a pirate, being called a pirate, or a thief being proud of being called a thief. It was just a negative name. But that's all it was just a little tag to wear on somebody and say, oh, that's a hooligan soldier. Well, the members of the company flipped that on his head. And I think a lot of folks will remember when I'd call the company to attention, or when usually when the organization is called to attention for a formation, or when all the troops are in formation, about a half a heartbeat later, the unit shouts out their motto. And after a very short period of time, I started getting phone calls about telling me, "Hey, man, your guys are really loud. They need to tone it down." I'd hang up on them. I said, "No, I'm never going to tell you to be quiet." But the unit pride was always there, but it was just inward facing. Because, like I said, it was 100 at the time, about 150 soldiers just working together. But once we were able to get the force structure we wanted, get the focus where we wanted it, and the platoons started kind of drawing together as these separate entities, and then competing against each other and competing against outside the company. And I've got one excellent memory of an example of that in a second. But you see the soldiers. Hey, are you in the 22nd? Yeah, I'm a hooligan. And are you are you in the rugged battalion? Yeah, I'm a hooligan in the 14th. So they didn't say rugged as much. They didn't mention the 555th Engineer Brigade. No, I'm Hooligans, damn it. And that was something that if you were in that company at that time and you hear the phrase Hooligans, damn it. Yeah, I think everybody remembers that. And that was all self-created by created by the troops. That wasn't some great command scheme that Captain Lau came up with, or the battalion, Colonel Buck in the battalion, or something like that. No, this was just soldiers that wanted. Once they started tasting success and seeing how people looked at them a little bit better, that's wind in your sails. You see soldiers like, oh wow, they're not making fun of us anymore. We don't have to be antagonistic back to them. We don't have to be defensive because we have nothing to be defensive about. So when the unit pride swells like that, man, it's just, that's what being a first sergeant is all about. When you see your unit develop confidence and faith in themselves and let them go. Oh, it's remarkable to watch. So one quick example, just prior to the deployment, the battalion had this rugged competition. It was, ruck marches and boards where a bunch of senior folks sit around and ask questions, and the junior soldiers try to answer them. All kinds of engineer skills test, and I placed very little importance on that because it was sure, it was cool, but the platoon sergeants and I got together and we said, hey, listen, are we going to go all out for this? And they said, I don't care. I said, okay, neither do I. Let's just find out who wants to participate. Give them a couple days to get ready and send them on their way. So that's what they did. And then a couple days later, we won just about everything. Sergeant Mack was the baddest of the bad non-commissioned officers. He was the rugged NCO. And gosh, I can't remember who the heck it was. I wish I could, and I'm embarrassed that I can't, but it will come to me. There was a board where the junior soldier went in there, and he didn't win, but this is pretty remarkable. He was a young private first class, or maybe even a private E2, and he went and sat in front of the board. And one of the first sergeants asked him to recite the creed of the non-commissioned officer, and being a private E2, you still have to be an E3 and E4 and then a sergeant before you even worry about that. And he said, I don't know the NCO creed. Okay, recite the soldier creed. Boom, he did that, and he answered most of the other questions. And he was so worried about how bad he would look. It would look on the unit, because he felt like he let his leadership down. And he said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't memorize the NCO creed. Well, the non-commissioned officer creed is 3 paragraphs long. And he stepped outside the room with the NCO creed on a piece of paper and read it and read it and read it. And then in very short order, about 2 hours later, when the boards were all over, he asked if he could go back in and talk to the board. And he walked in, stood at attention, and recited the non-commissioned officer creed verbatim. And the command sergeant major of the battalion said, holy cow. He said, and I wasn't at the board. The sergeant major called me and he said, I don't know what you've done down there in that unit. He said, but these are not the 22nd soldiers that I remember. I said, it's not me. I said, well, we got platoon sergeants and sergeants and staff sergeants that did this. But they were so amazed that the sergeant major went up and talked to brigade and just kind of said, hey, I don't know if you're tracking what's going on down in the 22nd, but they just won this and this, and rattled off the 5 or 6 events that the 22nd just won. I think we won 7 out of 9 events.
Oh.
And overall, it was a point system, so the 22nd ended up winning the competition. And I didn't even go to the award ceremony. I had something else to do, because it just, unit awards, great, cool. If a soldier can't wear it on his uniform, I don't care about that. But it was kind of a polite way of going, a little smudge on somebody and say, all you've done is talk down to us for the past year and a half. All you've done is treat us with disdain. Now that you've given us an opportunity to focus on ourselves and have something beneficial to work towards, look what we can do. And that right there was a great way to cap off the pre-deployment, kind of ramp up to the pre-deployment. So those are the kind of the positive drug tests. Just one soldier, he was late to work 85 out of 90 days.
That's crazy.
And nothing had happened to him. So you go from that, and this was a team of about 18 to 20 personnel that were just rotting the company away. You go from getting rid of that until now you've got privates that memorize the creed of non-commissioned officer in an hour and a half, 2 hours. You've got sergeant that goes out there and says, all right, how many pull-ups do I have to do? All right, I'm done. I won. So it was just all the cast-offs turned out to be pretty darn good when you put them all together.
So, 2 follow-up questions real quick, and then we're gonna have to take that first break. The first one.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So no, don't apologize. The company logo, you were saying it went from the beaver, the goofy looking beaver, and yeah, I mean, touch on that real quick, and then just a guess, and I hate to throw a name out there and it be wrong also, but when you talked about that young PFC or private who was on the board, it sounds like something Paiute would have done. Was it him?
It wasn't Paiute, it was his running buddy, bigger kid. The first enemy contact, Paiute and he had they were both gunners. If that story has come out yet, they were battle buddies. He's a bigger guy. It'll come to me.
Manchester?
Nope, it wasn't Manchester.
I'll pull it up on the break. I'm sure I can find that name.
Yeah. But real quick, so the goofy gopher, I couldn't stand it. So when I became the first sergeant, I pulled everybody in and I said, this gopher's got to go. And I don't think anybody said anything other than good. So basically we had a short ceremony where we killed the gopher. We smashed him and destroyed and shredded the picture. And Lieutenant Demona came up with the gopher skull that is wearing the World War II helmet. And he had a friend who was a graphic artist who donated it, his work, and said, hey, this is cool. So he came to me and he said, hey, First Sergeant, we killed the gopher, but what do you think about this? And I said, what is that? And he said, that's a gopher skull, a cartoon version of a gopher skull. And I said, I love it. So we did a couple things and tweaked it a little bit. And I walked in and I slapped it on the commander's desk and said, sir, there's our new logo. And all he did was look at it and say, cool, man, that looks vicious. And that from that day on, that was on all our slides. That was everywhere. So the hooligan logo of the World War II hat with the 22 and the ID tags and the gopher skull, that's the skull of the gopher that we killed ceremoniously. Yep, there it is right there. And that was, yeah, that all came together because of Second Lieutenant Demona, and gosh, was that Fuller's platoon at the time?
Demona was
Simcoe.
second, I feel like.
Or maybe,
No, I
maybe
could be
Blair.
wrong. Yeah, I don't know.
But anyway, yeah, he and the platoon sergeant came in and said, here you go. And I said, yeah, we are on it. Like I said, we did a couple tweaks and we came up with that and said, let's run with it. So that was the history of that.
Actually, I remember it was Simcoe. I remember him telling a story about that.
Yep.
And then just for clarification, a minor point, then we'll take the break. I know you said when we stood at attention, heartbeat later, we'd all yell hooligans. Damn it. I remember it being hooligans. God damn it. But maybe that was before you came and God got taken out. I don't know.
Yeah, I put out the word. I said, we're not going to have soldiers that would take offense to that in the formation. Okay. So we stopped the goddamn it, and it went to hooligans. Damn it. Yeah. I wouldn't let them yell out the damn it. So there was a you guys would keep it kind of hush, the damn it. But you knew when to say it and when not to. But it was always hooligan, really loud, hooligans. And we were usually the last ones to get released at the end of the day, or you were the last ones to get released at the end of the day because we worked you later than most everybody else. Not you, but the whole company. So everybody else was already leaving, and they'd hear us screaming that from across the quad, and they'd just laugh and say, hey, these guys are still working and we're going home. Well, yeah. Well, you guys were better than them at the end. So
Oh, and one more thing I do want to say before we lose the
Yes, sir.
momentum is I think I can speak for everyone. So on behalf of everyone, we want to thank you for getting us ready and not letting us deploy in that bag of ass that company was prior with all the people. Because I'm sitting there as you're talking about it, I'm thinking like, oh my God, how much different, honestly, how much different would that deployment have looked if that would have been what redeployed with? And it, yeah, but we never have to go there.
Never had to worry about it, right?
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna take our first break and come back in a couple minutes.
All right, I'll stand by. Thank you.
All right, so here's.
All right, thank you. So at the time I got to the 22nd, I'd been in the Army a little over 20 years, about 22 years. And I was not a combat engineer like all of the troops in the 22nd. I joined the Army as a bridge guy, a bridge crew member. And back in the day that I joined, 12 Charlies, which is what I was, versus a 12 Bravo, which is a combat engineer. We used to do a lot of combat stuff, or so we thought. We'd go out, blow stuff up, things like that. But we were bridge builders. We weren't out there clearing minefields. We weren't out there mixing it up with the bad guys in the training. We were back here building bridges. So you guys, I keep saying you guys because I'm talking to the Hooligan family. So the Hooligans are out there fighting the war, and we bridge guys are back here doing an important job. Building bridges and keeping transportation flowing. Well, my first deployment was Desert Storm, and I was a young specialist, and my unit was not the most professional organization. And I was just, I was a junior enlisted guy. And while deployed, I made the rank of sergeant. And I was trying to emulate my direct supervisors when a leader outside of my platoon came to me and said, don't emulate them. You can do better than the example they're showing you. And it opened my eyes. And I said, wow, you know what? You're right. Because that unit, we were very internally focused as platoons. I started looking up over the horizon and seeing what the other platoons were doing, and I said, "Oh my gosh, wow, we're not that good." So that was learning point number one, and that was a non-kinetic deployment, driving trucks and stuff like that. We drove through a lot of post-combat environments and saw a lot of dead Iraqi soldiers, and saw a lot of destroyed equipment, and got to witness the after effects of what our Army is capable of. And it was pretty awesome and a little bit terrifying at the same time. But I walked away from that deployment knowing myself better than I did when I got there. And fast forward, I made staff sergeant, and my next deployment was to Bosnia, and I was what the combat engineers would call a squad leader. And that was my first opportunity to kind of pull off the shirt and expose the S, and just get out there and just run like a heat-seeking ballistic missile. We tore through Bosnia, building bridges, doing reconnaissance. We did everything. Somebody would break down, they'd send us out there to go get them. We did just about anything. Once again, no kinetic activity. Saw a bunch of landmines and all that, but it was more personal and leader development in a deployed environment. So I moved another step closer to where I think I ultimately wanted to be. Fast forward, my next deployment was to Iraq. My first deployment to Iraq, and I was a platoon sergeant, which was sergeant first class, E7. And throughout the deployment, my platoon was about 100 kilometers away from our company, so we had to operate independently. And that was a great experience for me to not get daily intake and orders from somebody and then go execute them. We had to generate those thoughts. We had to think like a company first sergeant and commander did. And my platoon grew to over 100 people, which is pretty big. Typically, a bridge platoon is about 50 people. But we had a lot of detachments. So I was responsible for 100 personnel. So that was more good training for what it was going to be like to be a company first sergeant, and more experience in a deployment. Very little kinetic activity, some, but very little. And then course, I deployed when the 14th Engineers, before the 22nd deployed. Just prior to that, I deployed back to Iraq as a staff member, where I got to see the entire engineer effort across the country of Iraq, and it was a way for me to stop thinking like a platoon sergeant or at the company or platoon level, and start understanding that why the senior commanders make the decisions they make. And once again, I think it happened for a reason, and that was just one more screwdriver in my tool bag. So when I got the opportunity to do my final deployment with the 22nd as the first sergeant, I feel like I couldn't have been more prepared myself. I deployed as a sergeant, as a staff sergeant, as a sergeant first class, and then as an E8 without a first sergeant title, in gradual deployments of gradual intensity until it culminated with the 22nd deployment. Even with all that experience, all that preparation, all the pre-training that the company went through, and all the just trying to hit the company with a hammer, so steel tempers steel, harden steel. So you try to be hard and you try to hammer them and make them as tough and as ready as you can get. We still walked into Afghanistan at a very high rate of readiness, but full of self-doubt, because we were such a new unit, I think. And I could see it on everybody's face as we were getting ready to deploy. Everybody was confident they knew what they were doing, but they didn't know how they were going to do what they had to do. And I think most importantly, most of the company had no idea what the hell we were about to get into. And that takes me to my next, to the next level of discussion. So before the deployment, we found out we were going to be separated from the 14th Engineers. We knew Commander and I got called in and we got briefed that we were going to go to Kandahar province, and the rest of the battalion, the other clearance companies and battalion headquarters would be working out west in Helmand province. And so we asked the question, well, how the hell are we going to stay in contact with it? And they said, well, you're not. You're going to be sliced out and given to the 8th Engineer Battalion out of Fort Hood. And that was kind of a gut punch, because I really wanted to deploy under the 14th Engineers. The 14th is a very storied battalion. It's bad, all jokes aside, the 14th is one of the most accomplished combat engineer battalions at this point. And they were just vicious reputation of being badass troops in combat. And it was kind of a gut punch. We said, you know what? Okay, fine. Can't countermand Department of the Army orders. So we said, all right. Came back and we told everybody where we're going to be. And I admit I didn't know a lot about Afghanistan, because all my previous deployments had been to Saudi Arabia and Iraq a couple of times, and I was very familiar with that theater. And getting information, our battalion staff wasn't that focused on sharing information. They were so focused on getting ready themselves. So we did a lot of research and just tried to figure out what the hell is Kandahar, and where in Kandahar would we be. Nobody knew. So we came back and told the company, hey, we're going to separate from the 14th. We're going to be task organized under another battalion, and we're going to do route clearance in support of whomever the battle space owner is. It turned out to be 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, and then 4th Brigade, 82nd later on. And everybody was kind of surprised as well. But once again, I don't think anybody lost any sleep over it, because we're going to be hunting IEDs regardless of who your higher headquarters is. And coming up as a 12 Charlie, I think as a leader, as a soldier, as a man, as a husband, as a father, however I wanted to identify myself on any given day, I had prepared myself to where I knew I was capable enough of doing whatever was expected of me personally. I had no idea how complex route clearance was going to unfold in the battlefield. We had done it in training in the National Training Center. We had done it in theory on whiteboards with the platoon leadership and the company commander. We had done it in theory in I guess what you could call a TED Talk, kind of, with our senior commanders. But every environment's different. Excuse me. So as I walked in, I knew personally, I knew how to fire my weapon. I knew how to apply first aid. I knew how to, talk on a radio, that kind of stuff. And I knew how to I was comfortable going in saying I can lead this company into battle, even though I really don't know what the hell our mission is going to be. Because as a first sergeant, I had the benefit of not having to worry about the mission so much. I want my sole responsibility was to make sure that soldiers understood to wear their protective gear, make sure they wore the right protection. Hey, wear your earplugs. Yeah, little did we know about the lawsuit after that. But wear your earplugs. Wear your gloves so your hands don't burn. That kind of stuff. Wear your seatbelt so when the IED goes off, you don't hit the roof of the vehicle. Things like that. Clean your weapon so it fires when you pull the trigger. Maintain your vehicle so it doesn't break down and you don't get eaten by the wolves. So those are the kind of things that I was going to focus on. Let the commander worry about the mission, and that was my mentality going in. So when I walked into it on that plane, can I tell a quick story? We said goodbye to all our families, and a lot of the single soldiers or soldiers whose families weren't there were like, yeah, let's get on the bus. This is depressing. So they got on the bus, and then hey guys, it's time to go. So the people started saying goodbye to their families, and they go to get on. And I'm keeping an eye looking for runners, just to make sure that nobody says, all right, well, I'm going home with my wife. So as everybody's making their way across the field, people were actually in pretty good spirits. And I thought, cool, we're ready. And then I saw one soldier staying there with a spouse right by the bus. And I'm going to say who it was in a second. But the his platoon sergeant came over to me and said, hey, I'm a little nervous about this. I said, okay, you get your guys. I said, you're up. Everybody gave me an up sign. So I walked over to private rear and I said, hey, we have a new kid, brand new soldier. About as prepared as, this is before you take it out of the wrapper, and I pulled him aside from his spouse, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he looked at me, and he said, he wasn't crying or shaking or anything. He just said, "First of all, I'm scared." And I kind of looked around with a glance, and I said, I'll tell you a secret. I'm scared too." He said, "You are?" He said, "You're not scared of nothing." I said, "No, I'm not afraid of getting hurt." I said, "I'm not afraid of getting killed. I'm afraid something's going to happen to you." Or one of the other soldiers. I said, that's why I can't sleep at night, because something's going to happen to one of the soldiers in my charge. And I said, but we can't find out what's going to happen until we get our asses on this bus. So he says, don't be afraid, First Sergeant. You're deploying with me. Everything's going to be fine. So I said, okay, killer, let's go. So we get on the bus. I tell that story a lot. He was his chest was out to here. He's like, look, I'm not a wuss. I said, no, you're not a wuss. God dang it. You're afraid of the unknown. But what you do with that fear is what determines you as a soldier. So, anyways, little did I know, fast forward just a few short weeks, Rear would be the first person who was medevaced out of theater. Fortunately, he did very well. So we land in Kandahar. We'd flown in, we stopped in Kyrgyzstan, and then we went to Kandahar, and step off, and it's just hot and stinky, and you gotta love Area 50 poo and poo pond and the just the noise. Oh my gosh, Kandahar was so loud and just packed with people. And I met up with the first sergeant, with the sergeant major, Sergeant Major Paget. He came in. We were the last flight to land. So as you guys were all carrying your gear and all that, and walking to the PAX terminal to manifest into theater, Sergeant Major pulled me aside and he said, hey, I got some intel. And I said, okay, can we get out of the heat first? And go get a bottle of water. So we sat down and he said, hey, the unit you're replacing just took a casualty. And I said, okay. And he said, they got hit. It was a Husky operator, got hit. And it wasn't a beneficial situation. It wasn't an IED. It was a recoilless rifle. And I said, well, that sucks. And he says, yeah. He says, I think you ought to know. And I said, all right. And a lot of people thought that I didn't care about stuff like that, but to me, that's background noise, because I haven't gotten an analysis of the threat brief. I haven't gotten enemy activity updates and things like that. That was just a snapshot. That was a moment in time, and don't know any of the conditions around that event. So I just said, okay, good to know. So we went in and we processed through in relatively short order. We went through the ridiculous training in Kandahar, and then boom, boom, boom. We're on helicopters flying up into Fab Pasab. So when I stepped off that helicopter in Fab Pasab, I had like 3 major goals in mind. Number one, I really was just hoping and praying that the clearance that the platoons provided was enough to keep the soldiers and civilians traveling on the road safe. You know, I wanted the soldiers of the 22nd to save lives. Number two, I didn't want to conduct a memorial service. I think that's everybody's goal. I figured somebody would get banged up a little bit. I figured somebody would become a casualty, but I didn't want to bury a soldier. And then number three, I didn't want to fail as a first sergeant. I didn't want to make a bad decision. I didn't want to poorly advise the commander before he made a decision. I didn't want to give out bad guidance to the soldiers that resulted in either a failure of the first or second goal. So those were my 3 primary goals / expectations of going into this deployment. So we stepped off, met up with the unit that we replaced. It was a National Guard unit, good, decent bunch of guys. But I walked into our little area, because the 22nd was staying in just a little bit removed from the outer perimeter of Fab Pasab, but it was the first big compound, unit compound, on the Highway 1 side that ran. Highway 1, the only real, paved road in South Afghanistan, ran right past Fab Pasab, and we were the first unit compound there, surrounded by what they call Texas barriers, big tall barriers. They're all interlocking, so nobody could just shoot a soldier. Well, I walked into that and it was filthy. There was debris everywhere, and I realized, these guys are ready to go home. I'm not going to judge them on their last. They did like a 7 or 9 month deployment, because that's what the Compost 2 and 3 do. So I said, all right, you know what? We'll focus on cleaning this place up once they get the hell out of here. In short order, it might have been you, Joey, that went on one of the first patrols. Did you do a right seat ride with them?
No, I had to do a BIP course
That's right. That's right. You were down in CAF doing BIP course.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I forgot. I'm sorry. So we had sent but I do know Fuller was one of the first ones that went out on a patrol. And I was going around, kind of talking to the other first sergeant, getting the lay of the land, and Fuller came in, Sergeant First Class Fuller, might have been a staff sergeant at the time, but anyways, he came in and he kind of gave me the signal. So we went outside and he said, I don't want to go out with these guys again. I said, what are you talking about? He said, we were going like 30 kilometers per hour, 30 miles an hour. And I said, oh, I know. I was watching you on the Blue Force tracker, because we could watch the progression. I said, y'all were hauling ass. And what he said, and his story to me was, when he asked him why they traveled so fast, this unit basically said, hey, as long as we don't mess with the bad guys, they don't mess with us. So we just go out there and we travel the routes. We get our routes done, and then because they had taken some casualties and they had lost a soldier when they were in there fighting the fight. And it was a good unit, but they had just developed really bad habits because they were allowed to. And I said, okay, no problem. So I went on the next ride along, and I'm sure there were several in between, but the next one I'm cognizant of, I went on, and I saw the same thing. Now, one thing I didn't touch on, Fuller's first ride along, he had talked them into slowing down and demonstrating how they do, Crazy Ivans, the unpredictable patterns that the vehicles execute. So the enemy doesn't know what to expect. And then also, how do you turn around a route clearance unit? Bunch of big trucks with rollers on the front, and and Huskies and Buffaloes with odd ways of traversing rough terrain. You know, how do you get these turned around in these narrow roads? So when they slowed down and they started doing deliberate route clearance, they took fire. This is the first time Fuller went out. Multiple rocket-propelled RPGs, multiple small arms engagements. You know, ping, 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 bouncing off, and the unit he was with was not handling it well. And I can't remember if it was Paleo or somebody else in the vehicle with Fuller, and they were yelling, you know, back up, back up, back up. So they back up, and RPG would pass. They're like, drive forward, drive forward. And Fuller was telling me this, and I said, holy crap, you know, because I wasn't in the talk during that part. I didn't hear all the radio chatter, but I saw that they were hauling ass. And he said, yeah, he said, if we weren't there, it wouldn't have been an issue because they wouldn't have slowed down, and the enemy wouldn't have said, hey, why are you in my neighborhood? They would have just let them pass on through. So that opened my eyes a little bit, and I said, oh shit, you know, expectation number 2 of not taking casualties, that's going to be a challenge. But that was my first exposure to actually doing route clearance. When I did a ride along, it was uneventful. We were zero effectiveness, hauling ass, and what should have been about a 4 to 6 hour mission took us about an hour. And we got back, and I walked into to Captain Lau's little office in the command hooch, and I shut the door and I said, you need to get them out of here now. I said, all they're going to do is teach our guys bad habits. And I explained what happened with Fuller. He says, yeah, I've talked to him. And I explained what happened with me. And he said, yep, I've been watching it. So he called Colonel Buck down on the 14th and said, we've learned all we can learn. Colonel Buck said, you only been there for 2 days. He said, yep, left seat is over. Right seat, it never happened, but who cares? We are done. So that's how we got them out of there so fast. Now, being able to, and I was only with the 22nd for about 9 months. I say only, actually about 8 months. That 8 months, as anybody listening to this or reading about the company's experience, could be a Band of Brothers miniseries, you know, because it was, I mean, every single time a unit left in Zari district, there was a more than 50% chance that they would either be shot at, interact with an explosive device, or deal with something funky. So in the first few days actually went relatively uneventfully. The soldiers of the 22nd had only really had access to route clearance vehicles at the National Training Center, and they were mock-ups. They were fake Huskies and fake Buffaloes and all that. But they because as I mentioned earlier, the 22nd was a relatively new unit and hadn't received their full equipment complement yet. So the first time for them to actually go out and operate in route clearance equipment was in Afghanistan. And we were all terrified that you know, are these guys ready? Are they ready? And yeah, a lot of mistakes were made. You know, the drivers didn't really understand how big the Buffalo was. They rolled the Buffalo upside down into a garbage ditch. And fortunately, nobody was seriously injured. I think somebody bumped their knee. And you know, that vehicle was recovered. They had a couple times where the rollers took out some fencing around some of the fobs because the guy just didn't know how big the vehicle was, because hell, they're learning on the fly. But because of that, first, second, and third platoon at the time, there was 3 platoons. First, second, and third platoon was just very slow and methodical. And we had warned the people that we were supporting. We say, listen, we're new to this. We're competent and capable, but our guys are new to the equipment. So give them time. What used to take them an hour to do is going to take us 4 hours. And so some of the platoons, or each platoon, kind of honed their skills at different paces. But all 3 platoons were relatively slow in their first week or so of missions. And I think it was day 5 after the other unit left that and I'm not sure if it was exactly day 5, but this is one of the missions that stands out most to me because, as I mentioned, Private Rear was the last soldier to get on the bus before me, and that was the day that platoon got hit. It was the first time we had experienced a recoilless rifle as a unit, and as I was in the talk, everything was great. I'm throwing away junk, and I'm just kind of like, holy shit, I'm a company first sergeant in a deployed environment. Man, what am I going to do for 23 hours a day before I go to sleep? Well, I hear over the radio, IED, IED, IED was the first 3 words that I focused in on. And I said, oh shit. So I came walking out, and the way the talk was set up is we had screens where we could watch cameras from blimps in the area or drones that we could tap into. We monitored all the battle space radio. Each unit out there had their own frequency. So we had multiple radios we could monitor. And we always tracked the frequency of the area where our guys were. And so our headquarters personnel were watching on the screen and tracking movements of personnel, the little blue icons moving across the map on the Blue Force tracker. And then wham, and that was when we got the report that the vehicle got hit. And the initial report was an IED. And then very shortly after, another IED hit was the report on the same vehicle. But we were watching the vehicle, it was stationary. So we said, something doesn't add up. How can a stationary vehicle hit 2 IEDs? And as time progressed, time slows down. And a lot of times, your brain's moving faster than the actual events that are occurring, and you try to run possible scenarios. And I was waiting and anticipating and hoping it wasn't going to come across, but then a medevac, a casualty report started being called off, and we were notified that they had multiple wounded, and one of them was surgical. And I said, "Oh shit!" I said, "Okay." I said, "Find out which truck that is and give me the manifest." So one of the guys handed me the manifest, and I saw that it was a couple soldiers. The only one I'm really going to mention by name is Rear. Because there were some other things that happened in the vehicle that I can't confirm, and I don't want to speculate as to what happened. And I'll touch briefly on that in a second. But what had happened was an armor-piercing projectile had hit the side of the vehicle, and a CROWS, Common Remote Operated Weapon System. It's called CROWS. It's a little toy gun that goes up top, and it's controlled with a flight joystick. And Private Rear was the CROWS gunner, and he had his hand on the joystick right where it was supposed to be. And the armor-piercing projectile went through the vehicle and actually just sprayed Spall as liquid metal. And as the projectile penetrated the vehicle, it just dumped a bunch of hot metal onto Cosman, who was sitting next to Rear, and he was just, he was fine, but it's just imagine a bunch of cinders hitting you. And it wasn't pleasant, of course. He was not in an uncomfortable way. But then a portion of Rear actually got hit by the projectile. It hit the joystick rather that he was holding, and he was pretty severely wounded. And oh Jesus! So we looked at where they were and said, no, we can't medevac on it. By the time the helicopter takes off, they could drive back. So we told them, hey, do you have enough personnel? Break off a medevac team and get them back. And I'm thinking the whole time, I got to pay attention and make sure we do our first medevac right. There has to be something we can learn from this. And that's what a first sergeant thinks. A commander thinks, oh, great, now I don't have a full route clearance package. A spouse or a parent thinks, oh, my baby's hurt. But we don't have the luxury to think like that. That's not until later. And I'm thinking, okay, let's do this right. Please be ready. And the platoon did a great job. They medevaced him, got him back. And the commander and I went down and met him. So when they pulled into the aid station to the Roll 2 medical facility, the back door opened up and I saw the medic standing there, and he was covered in some blood, and he looked disheveled, and he was white as a ghost. And my first thought was, nobody told me the medic got hurt. And I said, Parker, what's the matter? And he said, I'm fine. And I said, well, then get out of the way. You're standing in his way. Oh yeah. So he got up, brand new medic, did a great job bandaging him up and all that, did his job very well. And then out walks the soldier, and you could tell by looking at him, he was not feeling so good physically, but he wasn't in pain because he had already been dosed up with a painkiller. He looked at me, he says, "Hey, First Sergeant, how you doing?" And I said, "I think I'm better than you are." That's our first interaction. I said, "I'm having a better day than you." So they got him in there, and he hadn't looked at his hand yet. So when he got a chance to, because Parker put the neck brace on him too. So he was kind of like this. So when he got a chance to look at his hand, he said, "Oh man," he says, "That's okay." And I said, "Yeah, it's all right." And I told him, I said, but you're going to have to go home now. And he reached over with his left hand. He grabbed the front of my shirt, which usually privates don't grab first sergeants by the front of their shirt. But of course, what am I going to do? "Hey, how do you, soldier?" No, I mean, he's obviously going through something very traumatic. And he said, "I'm not going anywhere." And, day 5, everybody's still running around. You couldn't get a thumbtack up anybody's butt with a sledgehammer. I mean, everybody's just puckered up tight. And this private, who's our first combat casualty, says, "I'm not going anywhere. Just put a bandage on, sew it up." And I said, "Well, it's a little bit more significant than that." And he said, "I'll be back." He says, they'll take me to Kandahar and they'll fix me up and send me back." I said, "Yep, okay, I'll see you in a few months. But okay, I'll see you in a few." And he never went. Now, true, he wasn't feeling pain at that time, but he didn't cry. He didn't say, "Oh my God, I'm wounded." No, and his wounds were pretty significant. Came outside, and the platoon was kind of hanging around, smoking cigarettes, and I said, "Hey, rear's fine." And they're like, "Oh, okay, cool." I said, "Get your asses back in the truck and get back out there." I said, you got dudes sitting there with blown up vehicle. You got to go, guys." And that they clicked. They said, "Oh shoot, we're not on vacation." So they jumped up and they hauled ass and went straight back out. And that was the first real enemy contact we had. And what I asked, it was Simcoe's platoon, and I said, I pulled all the platoon leadership in, the platoon sergeants, and I said, "Hey, Kelly, tell everybody what happened." And typical Sergeant Simcoe fashion, he started talking about, "Well, we screwed." I said, "Stop, man. You guys did phenomenally well. You didn't see it because you were in it. It seemed like you were all screwed up." I said, "You did phenomenally well," which became a pattern throughout every single engagement. All the feedback I got was, "Oh, we screwed this up." And I'm saying, no, man, the Hooligans never failed to do what they were supposed to do when the unexpected happened. Sure, things could have always gone better, but when you make a rapid snap decision, when a soldier's life or a mission success is hinging on your decision, the 22nd Engineer Clearance Company never failed a mission because of the company. The only missions that ever failed were because of outside influences or outside of organizations. But that was when we had a chance to sit down and do an after action review, and I gave an update. The rear had gotten down to Kandahar, stabilized, and he was getting sent home, and everybody said, "Okay, cool." I said, "He's going to be perfectly fine. He'll be the first person you see when you get off the plane." And that set the tone. Little did I know that over the next 5 days, we would have significant contact over the next 5 days on at least one platoon each day. And on 3 of those 5 days, more than one platoon was in significant contact. Day 5, we took our first casualty. Day 7, Hooligan soldiers killed their first enemy personnel. Another piece of thing that stands out to me was the 2 soldiers that engaged textbook. They worked very well together with their weapon system. And I got a radio message to have them email my phone number to the company so that the TOC personnel, the little clerks did. And I got a phone call from one of the guys down at one of the combat outposts, and he said, "Who were those 2 dudes on the machine guns?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I've never seen." He said, "I've been here for 9 months or 6 months, I think, at the time." He said, "I've never seen anything like that." He said, As soon as contact happened, I saw tracers come from both guns, and they neutralized the threat immediately. I said, well, okay, I'll let them know. Cool. High five the phone, hung up. I said, okay, great. So when I came back, I pulled the two soldiers in and said, hey, man, I think I was down the motor pool. I met him down there, and I said, hey, so tell me what happened. And I didn't know what to expect. And part of the reason why I asked them to tell me the story is I wanted to gauge their mindset, because these 19-year-old kids just killed multiple personnel. And these two young men, these two kids, looked me in the eye and said, well, after this event happened, threat exposed himself, the guy with a PKM opened up, and they just methodically walked me through it. And, I acquired the target, and part of our drill was I was going to go right to left, and any other engaging vehicle in front of me would have gone left to right. And it just so happened we could watch our tracers cross. And then they gave me an out brief that a colonel would be proud of, briefing a general. And then I said, okay, so what do y'all think about that? And he's one of the young kids said, well, it's what we were supposed to do. And the other one kind of smiled and said, I didn't know how I was going to do it. And he said, but I could do it again. And I said, okay. And he said, I don't want to do it again. He said, but I could do it again. And then the other gunner said the exact same thing. He said, oh yeah. He says, this isn't turning me off. I could do it again. He said, I don't ever want to shoot another person, but I won't hesitate. And I told him, I said, okay, well, go around throughout the company, because that was the real first engagement outward that we took it to the bad guys. And I said, well, go talk to the other gunners, give them some lessons learned. So those, within 7 days of being there, we'd already medevaced a soldier. We've already taken multiple IED strikes because the soldiers were just learning about the environment. That was part of one of the bad decisions I think I might have made, was chase the other element out first too fast. I weighed the risk of not being familiar with the environment, because we would have learned a lot more from them, against the risk of learning bad habits.
Right.
And I said, well, the guys are going to be in the environment, they'll learn it. But how many lives will the bad habits cost before we learn our lesson? And it goes back to, we're learning how to do route clearance at the time. If you learn it wrong, you're screwed. So in 7 days, we had pretty much run the whole gambit of most of the experience over the 8 months I was in the company. A lot of enemy contact. I mean, almost daily enemy contact. About 1,000 IEDs in 8 months is a lot of IED incidents. And as a matter of fact, the first month was so aggressive that Captain Lau, the company commander, pulled me aside one day and he said, hey, I'm thinking about requesting another platoon to get out here and help us. And I said, please do. I said, good luck, but please do. And the numbers that the 22nd was putting up of troops in contact, kilometers cleared, the daily mission, all 3 platoons were going out every single day. And the mission might have been 8 hours. It might have been 10, 12, 18, 20 hours. And then you guys would come back and at 11 o'clock at night and have a patrol brief at 5 o'clock in the morning for the next day. Or somebody would come back at 9 o'clock at night and rolling out at 2 in the morning. So that pace of operation, the fact that every single day after day 7, for I think 2 or 3 weeks, we had troops in contact. RPGs, recoilless rifles, small arms fire. Whether the troops were dismounted or mounted, didn't matter. Because the 22nd was doing deliberate route clearance. They were traveling 3 to 5 kilometers per second. Juicy targets, finding IEDs, letting route clearance trucks get blown up, heavily armored route clearance trucks getting blown up instead of lightly armored troop carriers. So the casualties of the unit we supported started to go down, whereas our incidents with IEDs started to go up.
Let's pause here one moment.
Yeah, so the first couple, specifically the first 7 and 9 days, but the first couple of weeks were just 0 to 60. I describe it as a shuttle launch. you kind of creep, and then all of a sudden you're in the stratosphere. I mean, it was just such a massive amount of activity, and that was actually a teaspoon serving when you look back at the whole deployment as a whole. But I'm peeling back and I'm watching the platoons go out, and like I had said, Captain Lau requested a fourth platoon, and we got it because the other units, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about them in general, but the other units in the 14th Engineers were doing just vastly different types of route clearance than we were. What the 22nd, and what I never really got into is what the 22nd was doing was our area was very, very small. And the benefit that our soldiers had was they were on the same roads every day. And the curse was they were on the same roads every day. So, that even in a very short period of time, while you're still learning, you start to develop a little bit of complacency, because all the activity that was happening, the soldiers were dialing in on what the real threat was in their mind. And a lot of the things that were potential threats were kind of falling by the wayside. And that was more of a safety consideration. They didn't worry about interacting with the locals. They didn't worry about deconflicting movements with other coalition forces, because everybody should have had the mindset route clearance goes through. Once we go through, there's a period of time that route clearance provides assured mobility, and anybody can go wherever the hell they want. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case. So as the first couple of weeks wind down, and the platoons were doing a really good job of sharing lessons learned. Like, holy shit, we got hit with massive small arms fire, and nobody was worried about getting shot. But hell, they had like 11 broken windows in their patrol, and you can't roll out and hunt IEDs with broken windows, because that's not, a small crack here and there, a bullet. But when you start taking multiple shots and the window's compromised, you can't go out and expose soldiers to IEDs. So our readiness was starting to go way down. Couple that with the fact that soldiers were exhausted, learning what they were doing. Missions were dragging on and on and on and on, and there was very little time for maintenance. So the vehicles were being held together with bubble gum and baling wire, and I know some trucks rolled out that probably shouldn't have, because things weren't working on them, spotty air conditioning and that kind of stuff. But we needed trucks out. So soldiers said, if I'm hot and sweaty, oh well, I got Gatorade, or I'll drink more water. So that was kind of the stumbling start to the 22nd deployment. You get through the first month, and the soldiers that came out of that first month, holy shit, we've already put people in helicopters for medevac. We've gone and picked up pieces of soldiers after the fact out of the trucks. We've inventoried soldiers' bloody gear and mailed it home to them. Thank God we hadn't taken a KIA, and none of the injuries at that point were catastrophic. We had some missing fingers and some banged up, but most of the injuries in the first couple of months were concussions and face wounds, that kind of stuff. But nothing drastic like the company would experience here in a little bit. But a battle rhythm started to develop, where the soldiers learned how to manage their time. And really, it's not like there's a whole lot of free time up at Fob Pasab. There's no boardwalk, there's no pizza delivery, or going down to Nathan's Hot Dogs or something like that. It was the dining facility, the showers, the bed, the motor pool. That was basically the 22nd Hooligan soldier's life for a year. And to the average person, that seems no, that's expected. You're at war. But the average person doesn't understand how difficult it is to get through the periods of inactivity in a deployment, where everybody focuses on, oh my gosh, you get shot at. How many times did you ever shoot anybody? Did you get blown up? It's when that stuff wasn't happening and you weren't cleaning your weapon or maintaining your vehicle or getting your ass chewed for something you did wrong, or getting a company coin for something you did right. It's the periods of inactivity that I found most difficult to handle, because that's when soldiers had time to think and had time to internalize what they had experienced in a relatively short period of time. So that first month, these brave little warriors came out of their shells and demonstrated, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm pretty good at this shit. Yeah, we got a couple bumps and bruises, but we killed a lot of bad guys, for a rock clearance unit. And we had really developed a really good reputation with the units that we supported. And it was a good time to be a hooligan. So that would have been around the August timeframe. So that's what it kind of just a myriad of weird missions came in. We'd get a random phone call and say, "Hey, we need anybody in your unit know how to operate a bulldozer?" Yeah, yeah, we need somebody to go down and operate this bulldozer. So I made some recommendations, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't just send, because they asked for like a bulldozer operator, and I said, no, that's not a good idea. Send an uncommissioned officer with them. No, that's fine. We'll send 2 operators. Everything will be fine. Well, that mission didn't go very well, and one of our soldiers got wounded. It wasn't wounded by enemy fire, but he was wounded because of enemy fire. He actually was in the dozer trying to get it fired up and recover it when they came under attack, and the hatch fell on his hand and almost cut his hand off. So weird stuff like that was becoming a normal occurrence. Like, what the hell's a bulldozer doing out in the middle of the battlefield? Well, they were trying to push down trees and it got stuck. And they got attacked, and so they're like, hey, call raw clearance, they'll go get it for us. So it became like the Swiss Army knife of the battlefield. It was strange. Hey, we want to field this new piece of equipment. Give it to raw clearance, they'll figure it out. So we started seeing what's called ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. So I mentioned earlier about the balloons, where we'd sit in the talk and we'd watch these balloon feeds. The priority, the tactical priority in Afghanistan shifted away from where we were, because getting south of Highway 1 was the priority in Afghanistan. And the 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain had kind of accomplished that and was kind of licking their wounds because it was a pretty tough go. And as 22nd was out there doing route clearance every single day, there would be an air insertion, and they would do a firefight over here, and then they would set up a combat outpost, and then that would expand the route clearance territory, and then expand the route clearance territory, and that just kept kind of incrementally growing bigger and bigger, which is why we had 4 platoons, and everybody was still going out at least on average 5 to 6 times a week. More like 6 times, but sometimes guys could get a day or 2 off throughout the week. But that, when the priority of resources moved back up to the northeast, up by the Kabul area, where the capital area of Afghanistan, Bagram and Kabul, we lost a lot of intelligence assets. We no longer had dedicated drones that would fly over and check the routes. So we had a failed attempt, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I made. I thought we could incorporate drones into our route clearance, but because of the size of our area and being so small, we tried multiple times to try to fly a drone, and then the person, the operator, would be in the vehicle and monitoring the route ahead. But hell, when you're only doing a 20-kilometer clearance and it looks like a bowl of spaghetti, it's not just like a straight line distance, it wasn't effective. And then plus, where we were at, the only place to launch the drone, wasn't sufficient, because hell, we're in a combat output, we're in a forward operating base with big walls. So a few times when they tried to launch the drone, it hit a wall and smashed. So it was just an epic fail. But we tried. We tried to give the route clearance packages that level of technology and just that extra advantage. so they weren't going in blind. And also, what we found out later was we didn't necessarily lose some of the eyes on the routes. We were just not provided access to them. So, and it wasn't. I don't think it was intentional. The brigade that we supported, there was a hate relationship with the brigade we supported, because they didn't tell us, we weren't brought in on their plans. They didn't brief us on what the commander's intent was. They would just tell us, hey, here's where we want you to clear for the next 3 or 4 days. And it would look eerily similar to the previous 3 or 4 days. And so we would go up there and ask, hey, can we get tied in with your operations? Because what good, we're going down the routes and no one's following us. Why are we going down these routes? Route Toronto, I mean, Jesus, I think everybody has PTSD from Route Toronto. You know, why are we going down there if no one's traveling that route? Do it. So it was this, and it goes back. We're the 22nd was the only unit in Afghanistan that was going out every single day. Most people would plan a week, go out and do a couple of days of route clearance, and then come back. That was the traditional route clearance approach throughout everywhere else in Afghanistan, except for our area. And there was one instance. Route Toronto was about 2 kilometers long, and there was a big company base on one end and a small outpost on the other end. And it was running the gauntlet. Every time a route clearance package went down that route, they got RPG, small arms, IED strikes, something happened. But we determined relatively quickly that the coalition forces, the other U.S. soldiers, they weren't on the road. You know, because we were tracking them on the Blue Force tracker, watching unit movements, and there was nobody driving down these roads. No, I'm sorry, that's a little bit later. I'll get to that in a second. But anyways, this Route Toronto, one of the missions we would do is we would provide clearance to go down and clear it, and then come back, and then they could go down and resupply the little outpost on the end. So this was the first massive IED that 22nd encountered, and that's the one with Sergeant Allen's truck vaporized. So the unit went down. If you're a little familiar with this, the unit went down and conducted clearance all the way to the turnaround point, and a habit had been developed of, we made it. You know, it's that 2 kilometers gets really long when you're going about 3 kilometers per hour if the snow stops, and everybody just kind of collective exhale as the units get ready and kind of pause, catch breath. All right, guys, now we got to make it back, you know, and then get ready to queue out. Well, that's when Sergeant Allen's truck looped around and got blown up, and that was who was that? That was Grody, Allen, and who was driving?
I'd have to go back and check. I don't remember.
But anyways, yeah, that truck was thrown over 50 meters. It was a massive explosion. And that was, like I said, that was the first big blast. Fortunately, relatively minor injuries. Soldier was still medevaced out of theater. But it was a catastrophic hit vehicle-wise and just magnitude. But the result was something you could live with. You know, a very, very badly broken leg, and a couple of banged, bruised brains from concussions. But everybody survived. It wasn't until later that we found out, later that day, that somebody briefed us that they had abandoned that outpost. That little cop at the end of Toronto was empty because they had taken such savage beatings out there. The commander decided to pull them back, and they never told us that there was no need to drive down that route. We were still ordered by brigade to go do it. So it was just one of those instances where we're company. You know, I'm a company first sergeant. I got a lot of power in my unit. You know, I can do whatever the hell I want. But when I'm talking above battalion to brigade, they don't give a crap what my company commander and I are saying. But we still go up there and scream and holler and get told to leave. And we're just throwing our hands up in the air. We're sending these guys out every single day, and they're getting blown up and shot at. And for what? For what? So finally, to close this little topic out, we had a conversation with a couple of the company commanders out there in the combat outposts, and said, "Hey, what's going on?" I did a ride along, and I'd pop in and I'd talk to some of the guys. So I'd ride with the route clearance package. We'd pull in. I said, "Give me a minute." I'd run inside and say, "Hey, First Sergeant, why are we going down these routes when you're not doing anything on the roads?" He said, "We've been ordered to stay off the roads." And I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, we've been ordered to stay off the roads." So my first response was to go postal. And he said, "Our operations are going off road. We're not using roads to get anywhere anymore. We're going across fields." And that's when that unit started, the 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain. When they were doing an assault on a colot or a village, or a specific target, they would typically either go in with helicopters or they would haul ass down the road about an hour or so after we went through, and they would do a shock attack. Well, what they transitioned to was ground assaults. So they would position platoons of infantry out there in the field. We would do our route clearance, and the mentality, the thought process was, while their eyes are on us, these guys would attack across the field or something and go get a high value target, or whatever their purpose was. It was effective to some extent, but it created unnecessary threat for the route clearance elements out there, and unnecessary threat for dismounts, because in relatively short order the enemy said, okay. They stopped mining the roads or putting explosives in the roads, and they started putting out small anti-personnel explosives in the fields, which everything's cyclic. So before long, now we're back on the roads, and infantry was following behind us doing combined assault. So it was just at all levels, the logic, it just doesn't make any sense. And it wasn't just about route clearance. We had a what would be considered a mortar attack, but it was actually a recoilless rifle attack on Fob Passab. And the senior commander watched the attack happen on screen through one of the raid cams. And when I say watch the attack happen, they watched the team set up the tripod, put the recoilless rifle, load the round, aim, and fire. And when the explosion happened on Passab, some weird conversations happened up in the command tent. And instead of saying, "All right, turn the gun and kill that person," which is what the combat soldier's thought process would be, it was, "Hey, we need to find out why that guy's doing that." That was the gist of the message from the command. So after 6 or 8 rounds were fired, they watched on the camera as the person broke down the recoilless rifle, put it on the side of a motorcycle, and drove away. And it just defies logic. We're down here on the ground. Guys are out there trying to keep routes clear so people don't get killed. And you've got senior commanders that appear not to be willing to take the fight to the bad guys. And that was that from my foxhole, or from my position, it was hard for me to relate the two. I'm not going to go down and tell the privates, "Hey, you know what had just happened? This is," you can't break their morale. You can't break the young leaders, like the young sergeants, and say, "Hey guys, no one up there cares about you." That's toxic. So instead, we try to build a shield around the company and say, "Okay, we know it's going to suck. Get as much intelligence as you can. Let's get out there and do that." So that was kind of the overall. So we talked about the first month, talked about the overall environment of just weirdness that was happening. It was really hard to kind of get a handle on what the hell was going on. And I think in the first 3 months or so, we kind of hit an even stride. The end of the summer was coming, and there's a big talk in Afghanistan about the fighting season. When the hills on the east snow in, and they can't get the weapons through Pakistan, the fighting season ends out there, and then it gives everybody a chance to lick their wounds, and then they come back in the spring and start fighting again. Well, then when we were, there was no fighting season. I always try to tell the guys, fighting season started the day you stepped off the airplane, and fighting season will end the day you step back onto Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. So I don't want to hear about fighting season. So we kind of banned that term in the company. And it kind of played out that way, because July, August, September was kind of crazy. And then things kind of slowed down a little bit. There was some weird, like I mentioned, some weird missions. There was, people would fly in and we'd have to do static displays, pick a couple soldiers, and they'd brief some congressmen on what's going on. But every day, guys were going out the wire. Every day, guys were going out and finding IEDs. And that's really when the fines started to add up. Like, holy crap, we went 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, a week without getting blown up. But we found 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 IEDs. Cool. That was a good thing. So the enemy figured that out. So the enemy adapted. And what they did was they started doing a lot less pressure plate or victim operated IEDs, and they were going back to the command detonator. And what I didn't know, that was also a pretty tough time because of all the ancillary things that were happening outside of the company. Our brigade really didn't like us. And I'll be honest, I was called up to the brigade sergeant major's office and told if I had the authority, I'd fire you. And I said, why? And he said, well, I found one of your guys not wearing his eye protection. And I said, okay. Did he put it on when you told him? He said, yeah, but I'd fire you for that. And I, okay. Are we done? So then I went back to work. So that was the environment that we worked in. One guy didn't have eye protection on, so the commander and I almost got fired for it. And then the new commander would have come in and said, all right. And he probably would have gotten fired a couple weeks later because somebody would not have their glasses on. But what I didn't know was, as this cat and mouse game with the bad guys was happening, what the route clearance platoons were starting to do is they were dismount, and they were getting out of the vehicles, and they were looking for these command wires, and they were trying to do it at the platoon level and trying to figure things out, because you're driving along and they bury these IEDs, you can't find them, and then click, boom, they pick the exact target they want. 3 trucks go over it, boom, they just blow up the truck they want. So we caught wind of it and said, let's make this a company effort. Let's put all our effort into one successful mounted and dismounted patrol. And that kind of, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but that brings me to December 7th. That was my first time to go along on a dismounted movement. And because I knew that it was going to be a long distance dismounted and mounted route clearance, I wanted to see what the challenges were and what the platoons came up with. I was by no means the expert on route clearance. That was the troops on the ground. I just wanted to make sure nobody took on any unnecessary risks, or if something did happen, I could maybe assist the leadership through that. Well, that morning we got up, and there's 2 things about that morning that kind of ring out to me. Staff Sergeant McCallum from 2nd Platoon actually joined in with 1st Platoon to beef up and augment. Plus, he was very familiar with that area, and it was a way to draw in another platoon to start sharing that information that we were developing. So we were out front just joking around, and I noticed one of the guys had a grenade in his grenade pouch. And I said, man, I told Sergeant Grimes, I said, hey, Sergeant Grimes, that's bullshit. I said, you guys all have grenades. I don't have any grenades. And he said, you're the first sergeant. You don't need a grenade. And I said, yeah, but I want one. Just joking around. So, we all loaded up with the trucks. We did our mission brief and drove out to a dismount point, a staging area, where we all got out of the vehicles and getting ready to start our walk. And the plan was to walk down this couple kilometers alongside the road on the west side of the road, while the trucks would follow behind us and clear the route. And we were trying to gauge our movements so they could support us, because we're just a bunch of yahoos out there with cap guns and helmets, and the big guns are on the trucks. Well, we just started to get ready to begin the mission, and like a little dust storm came in. So we said, oh shit. Well, we were going to wait it out, but we got ordered back to base. So I made the recommendation to the command after talking to the guys on the ground. That was your platoon, of course. And I said, hey, let's put this off a couple of days. We just went out there, broadcasted what the hell we're going to do. The platoon's on board, and they're not very comfortable. They know the enemy knows what's going on. So the decision was made. Nope, once the air clears, go back out there. So, all right, I can get behind that. So we all loaded back up when the air cleared and went back out there. As soon as we began the dismount movement, we had motorcycles following us. We had people walking alongside us, but they were not threatening, not doing anything bad. And it's kind of funny. It was a very small group of people, but there was a guy up front looking for bombs with a sweeper, minehound, an Afghan soldier behind him with a device that could find command wires to detonate the IEDs. And then it was the Sergeant Allen, then myself, and then Staff Sergeant Grimes was in charge of the element behind me. And as a first sergeant, I'm just a guy. I'm going along and just observing what the team does. Well, we went on and we had a couple of instances where we found a couple of things of interest. But our movement was not as easy as I thought it was going to be, because there were, stone walls, grape rows, big deep ravines where it's 4-foot ditch, 4-foot ditch, 4-foot ditch. So, you negotiate all that stuff. And we finally got down towards the end of the route. And I was talking to the back of Sergeant Allen's head. And I said, well, we're just about at the end of the route. And the whole world just exploded. And it wasn't an actual explosion, but about, I would say, 50 or 60 rounds came in and landed between Private Logan, who was the front guy, and Sergeant Allen, who was in front of me. Just a barrage of bullets hit, and dirt flew everywhere. And Logan and the A&A kid just dove down into the ground, and Sergeant Allen was fully exposed. I jumped backwards behind a berm, and I said, Sergeant Allen, get back. And I thought he was dead. I could have, there's no possible way he wasn't hit. I watched, when you're taking a step and your feet are like this, I watched 3 rounds go between his feet. And I knew he was cut to pieces. Well, after, it seemed like 30 seconds, but it was probably just a second or two. He turned around and he dove back behind the berm with me, and I grabbed him. I said, are you hit? And he said, no, I don't think so. I said, holy crap. So we had no idea where the fire was coming from. And Logan and the A&A kid are just laying prone. And there were 2 machine guns up ahead of us as we were heading south. They would have been on our west-hand side. And they were just going for broke on these two soldiers, and they didn't hit a damn thing. It was miraculous. I am not exaggerating when I say probably 100 to 200 rounds of ammunition were expended, and the bullets hit all around them. And they finally, there was a slight break, I think, when they were reloading, so they got back behind cover. And I don't know how the hell Logan didn't get shot. So we're scanning and we're trying to figure out where the hell this fire's coming from. But every time we put our heads up, pop, 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 they'd fire, and we could feel the bullets hitting the other side of the berm. And it was very accurate, very well planned out. This was a detailed planned out ambush. And we said, holy crap. So, poking. And I looked over at Grimes next to me, and I said, hey, Sergeant Grimes, I don't know if you know this, but I think these guys are shooting at us. And it's kind of break the tension. And he looked at me, he said, no shit. I was just kidding, by the way. But they were trying to kind of ease up. So everybody took a couple breaths. Where the hell are they? And Grimes and Mac over here had a 203 grenade launcher. So they loaded grenades and they were ready to fire, but we couldn't figure out where the hell the fire was coming from. So we saw a dude that was coming around towards us, and he had an AK. So we shot him, got rid of him, and then we couldn't figure out where the hell the machine guns were. And the funny thing was, the whole time we're waiting for the trucks to catch up. And I don't know how long this was. This was probably a few minutes, probably five minutes that this went on. But it felt like about a week. Because like I said, every time you poke your head up to scan, pop, 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 and it was just, it was a very eerie. So we get the notification that the trucks are moving again, because the trail vehicles had found an IED or were interrogating a possible IED, and they couldn't just drive over it. But once it was clear, the trucks come rolling, and we started to have this feeling like something's going to go wrong, and somebody's going to get hurt here. That thought process was starting to creep into our little group, because we had no support, and it was just not a positive situation. But fortunately, trucks come rolling in, and this badass dude on the Crows system did a quick burst and took care of the enemy for us. It was easy to see, I presume, on thermals.
It was
or IR.
open turret, actually.
Oh, was it open?
Yep.
Oh,
No,
I thought
open
you had a
turret.
Crows. There was open turret, but the vantage point of being able to look and say, okay, well, there they are. Within about 5 seconds, the threat was neutralized and all the bad guys were shot. So we just got up and said, okay, well, fight's over. That was interesting. So we started going again, and we made it about 20 feet. And then I was talking to Sergeant Allen. He was right here on my right in front of me, and zoom, we heard a rifle shot and a bullet was past our head. So we dove back down again, and there was a sniper right to the south of us. He could have shot us at any time, I think, if he had a clear sight, but because of where we were, he didn't have a clear sight. So we get off, and there was another pile of debris. So we all hide behind that, and we're trying to figure out where this guy is. And where I was, we're kind of in an L shape. So he would pop up and he would take a shot at Grimes, Staff Sergeant Grimes, Staff Sergeant McCallum, and a couple of the guys that were behind. But I don't think he saw us on the right hand side. And I remember seeing him pop up and pop down, and I said, "Hey, I know where the guy is." I said, "If you keep an eye on him, we can move up and shoot this dude, and we know exactly where he is. Next time he pops his head up, we'll shoot him." And he had like an old hunting bolt action rifle, like looked like an M1 or something, or an Enfield. And I said, "All right." So Sergeant Grimes said, "I'll just throw a grenade out there for cover while they're moving." So he popped up, fired a grenade, and this was probably about 20, 25, 35 yards. And as Grimes fired it and went back down, he saw the sniper coming up out of his little peephole. And then Grimes went down behind cover. We came around a clump of trees at the exact, a half a second later as the round impacted. And as I'm passing the tree, I see the explosion, and it is exactly in his little firing position. So Grimes saw him stand up. The round came in. I don't know if it hit the guy in the chest, in the belly button, or in the leg, but I stood up, and they're like, "No, first sergeant, you're gonna get shot." I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Sergeant Grimes, you just shot him with a 203. He's like, "No, I did." I said, "Yeah, you did, bro. That's exactly where the guy was." So I said, "I'm not worried." But that was crisis number 2 in a very short period of time. So now our stress levels are a little high. Adrenaline. So we kind of went into this little built up area, a little compound, while the vehicles cleared down to the end of the road, because we really wanted to be away from the vehicles, because if an IED went off, we didn't want to get messed up. And then secondly, just wanted to take a break for a minute, So we all went in there. Vehicles go down, and they find an IED, basically right next to where we were, but it was probably 50, 80 yards away. And I said, "Okay, no big deal." Yes.
Real quick, the time limit left on this one is like 5 minutes, 30 seconds.
I'll be done.
Well, I don't know if you need to be. I thought before you, there might be a good time to pause if you wanted before you went to the next phase.
2 more minutes, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so now the scenario is we're facing south, T intersection. On the main road going down, they found an IED, and they're waiting for authorization to blow it up. And then we're over here in a compound. So everybody's kind of in a pause. At that time, as all this conversation is happening, we start hearing from the Apache helicopters overhead. "Hey, you got about 10 or 12 guys moving up from the south on your position." And that is what spurred the activities that will close out December 7th. But we went into security mode. We got a couple little dismount dudes. Problem is, all our firepower was behind the IED. So the current situation is we're trying to secure ourselves. The trucks are all back here, and we're waiting for authorization to blow up an IED. All right, so a lot of stuff was happening, and the added complexity of the Apache helicopters overhead, and also in that within a couple of kilometers of us, there had already been 3 or 4 medevacs that morning. So it was a very, very active day. A lot of activity going on. We've been very fortunate so far. And so I was sitting on the side talking to Sergeant Allen. He had our radio, and when it came over the radio that some bad guys are coming up from the south, Sergeant Grimes and Sergeant McCallum said, "Hey, First Sergeant Allen, we're going to go check and see if we can get eyes on the south." So this is a little walled-in compound, and Allen and I were on the east side of it. Logan, the poor minehound kid that just got pelted with, or barely missed with near misses with a couple hundred rounds of ammo. And he was sitting down with the Afghan kid and a couple other dismounts. And Grimes and Mac went up to the south towards the building to see if they could get any line of sight. So we're scanning and scanning and scanning, and we hear over the radio, "Hey, be advised, there's 2 on the roof." I'm sorry, no, just before that, we were talking about how crazy that morning had been. You know, we're on, we're off, we're back on again. We get ambushed with machine gun, very coordinated ambush, and the sniper. And we're joking about, hey, we've been lucky so far. And I look back and you can see the trucks down the road behind us. And I know I just told you this a second ago, but I want to say it again. I looked at Alan and I said, "Hey, which truck is Wardell in?" And he's like, "Oh, he's way back there." I said, "Well, call him up and tell him to come closer, because if the shit hits the fan, I want him close." Because contrary to what other folks may have said, I honestly don't believe we would have been able to get out from behind that berm, because we had no covered route or any concealment that we could provide, and there was no other place for us to go. So if we had tried to leave that location, we would have been killed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It was so accurate, and as I said, they were on that berm. But when the trucks came through and Sergeant Wardell was in a matter of a couple seconds, took care of what we couldn't do in a couple of minutes. That's the only reason we had gotten to the point we're at right now. So we get down there and everything's going crazy, and we're laughing and joking about that. And we hear over the radio, "Hey, be advised, there's 2 on the roof." So I said, "Oh shit. Okay, you look that way, I'll look this way." And we're kind of scanning the roof of the little city out there, the little town. And we can't see anybody up on any of the roofs. And Alan taps me on the shoulder. He says, "Oh, he's talking about them." And then I looked over and I saw Staff Sergeant Grimes and Staff Sergeant McCallum up on top of the roof of the little building. Now recently, and now those buildings over there are only about half as tall, because half of the room is underneath the ground, and so the roof is only about eye level. So they build it underground because there's no air conditioning there or anything like that. It's a way to control the temperature in the house. So I'm looking directly at them, and they're only 5 or 6 feet above the ground. Now pause right there. A recent trend that they started doing, that the bad guys started doing, is they started putting small anti-personnel mines and IEDs on rooftops. And they did that because that's how some of the infantry bubbas would go in, and they would assault a building, and they'd breach the roof, or they'd put people up on the roof for security. So that clicked in my head, and I said, "Oh shit, man, these guys are rooftop IEDs is what they were referred to as." So I don't know. I was probably, I'm going to guess, 20 yards away from where they were, and I can picture this in my head as clear as yesterday. I started walking towards them, and Staff Sergeant McCallum was facing the east, closest to me, and on the other side of him was Staff Sergeant Grimes facing the west. And now Grimes was already kneeling down and pulling security. And Mac looked over at me, and I started to say, "Get the fuck off that building." But as he was giving me the thumbs up, and I think he thought I was going to say, "Get down, you're exposed." So he gave me a thumbs up and started to kneel down. And all I got was, "Get the fuck." And then boom, he knelt on some type of explosive. And I take everything that I had said about 23 years of getting ready to that point, and all the deployments and everything. That was the first time in my life where my life stopped. The world stopped, and I didn't care about anything else in the world, but I just watched a soldier explode in front of my face, and I said, "Holy shit! There's no way in hell he survived." Um, and it was almost like a reboot of the brain. Now, also, I covered the track, so I was probably only about 10 meters from the building when it detonated, and the concussion kind of knocked me a little loopy. So the combination of trying to reboot my brain to say what the hell just happened and kind of getting my bearings, I looked over, and the first person I saw was Private Logan, and his eyes were as big as saucers, and he said, "What the?" He jumped up, and I said, "Logan, get over here, bring your mind hound." So he swept the little ramp up to the roof. He swept it, and he was the first person to get up and look on top of the roof, because it was, like I said, it was about 6 feet high. So when he got up and looked back at me, he was pale as a ghost. And I said, "Oh shit." I said, "Logan, stay right there." So I walked up to him, and I looked, and I didn't see anything that looked hazardous. I didn't see any telltale signs of a bomb or anything. But what struck me is I couldn't see Sergeant McCallum. He wasn't there. And I thought, there's no way the explosion was big enough to vaporize him. So I said, "Okay, we'll worry about that in a second." So I told Logan, I said, "Stay low, get up there and sweep the roof. We got to go help Grimes." Now, you can edit out whatever you need to edit out, but Staff Sergeant Grimes was laying there, and he was right next to the explosion when it went off. So he took a savage blast. And he's just like you watch a movie or something. His uniform was smoking. He was grievously injured. And without getting too specific, you could have given an anatomy class um, based on his injuries. So you could see very, very deep into his wounds, and it was not good. So Logan, to his credit, this poor kid, he got up there, and now Grimes was a squad leader, and that guy is everything to him, and he just watched a squad leader explode. And so he gets up there, and he swept around, and he did everything he's supposed to do, because he was a good little troop. And he finished sweeping, and so I was able to go up, and if we all went up there and got blown up, it wouldn't have helped Grimes any at all. So I went up there and I looked at him, and I said, "Okay." Alan got up there and said, "Where the hell is Mac?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I got this. You go find Mac." So I was able to do I borrowed Grimes's first aid pouch, my first aid pouch. We were able to get his face bandaged up. He had really bad injury on up and down the whole right side of his body. And he was talking to me. And I remember two things I told him. I said, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. I don't have any morphine to give you. I know you're in a lot of pain." And he said, "No, I'm sorry. I lied. Before we went up there and we called out to him, 'Grimes, are you okay?' And he said, 'Don't come up here. I can't forget this.' We said, 'No, we're going to come up there and help you in a second. But do you know where Mac is?' He said, 'Don't come up here. There's IEDs up here.' He said, 'You'll get killed. Just stay down there.' I said, 'Well, we're not going to stay down there.' So he's not thinking about help. He's thinking about don't get hurt. That's already his mindset. We're like, 'Yeah, whatever, dude.' So once Logan cleared, we got up there, and I said, 'Hey, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to give you for pain.' I said, 'But the medics will be here shortly.' I said, 'But we're just going to get you bandaged up.' And he started talking to me, and um, wasn't pleasant, because he had really, really significant facial injuries. And as he's talking, I got to see something that I never thought I'd see, the inner workings of somebody's jaw. And I said, "Grimes, no offense." I said, "But don't talk to me anymore, because you're really kind of creeping me out a little bit." And I'm kind of a jokester. And I think he kind of knew. He's like, "Yeah, I just need to sit here and just focus on surviving." Um, and up until that point, I would say that he in my deployment, he was not the most severely injured soldier I've ever seen, but he was by far the most severely injured soldier I'd ever done first aid on. So while we were getting him bandaged up, Logan said, "Hey, I found Mac's weapon. I found a weapon." And what had happened was, when Sergeant McCallum blew up, he was blown into the air, and there happened to be a hole in the roof. And he went down through that hole, and his weapon wedged in the hole. So Logan, now Alan was already down there, but Logan said, "I found his weapon." And he pieced together what happened. So they ran down, and I don't know, it was all hearsay what happened down there when they recovered Mac out from the building. But had he not seen that weapon wedged in there, it would have probably delayed them getting access to him. But anyways, we got Grimes taken care of, and the guys down there got Sergeant McCallum taken care of. And then about that time, Staff Sergeant Fuller drove through the freaking Colot wall with his truck. Boom! I heard an explosion. I said, "Oh shit, not again!" I turned around and there was a truck blasting through the wall. Poor Sergeant Fuller jumps out, and he's got his number one squad leader. I say number one, like there's always a first and second squad leader in a platoon. Grimes and Mac were both the number one squad leader in their respective platoons, and he just got his number one and second platoon's number one blown up. The medic got up there, everybody got prepped for movement, and I started looking around, and by then the trucks had come closer, so we were secure. And I started looking around at the faces of the platoon, and everybody's looking down at Sergeant Mac and Sergeant Grimes. Now Grimes' wounds were covered because they were all bandaged up, but he still had exposed wounds down his side. And obviously, Staff Sergeant McCallum ended up losing both of his legs. One leg was already gone, and the other leg was mangled pretty badly. And watching all the soldiers just kind of taking that in, like, holy shit, these are the two baddest dudes I know, and they just got taken out. I got zero chance of surviving this. That's the image I could see in their eyes. And I said, oh shit. So when the helicopter came and landed, we loaded in the casualties, and the flight medic looked at me and he said, "First Sergeant, are you coming?" And I was just about to climb into the aircraft, and I turned around and I looked at their faces, or at y'all's faces. And the last person I looked at was Sergeant Fuller. And he just looked like, he didn't look like he was doing so well. And I said, no, I said, I'm gonna stay here with the guys. I couldn't perform surgery on these guys. I don't know what the hell's going on. So they were gone. And 30 minutes later, they were in surgery. They both survived, and they're both doing remarkably well. I think my concern was a little misplaced because Fuller did just fine. I thought he was defeated. This was the culmination of a bunch of serious events that had happened over the previous month or so. You know, trucks burning to the ground after IED strikes and things like that. And he just couldn't feel like he could get ahead. He's like, oh, we're just losing people. We're losing trucks. What the hell? He did remarkably well. He knew exactly what to do. I just talked to him to kind of keep him grounded a little bit, make sure everything was all right. The lieutenant did a great job. Sat in the truck, did the reports, got all the information. What led to that, and the reason we got stuck in that situation that we were, when that IED was found, and the request to blow it in place went up, the request was denied. Because when they looked on the map at that location, they saw that building compound we were at. Now that building had been destroyed by something explosive a long time ago, and nobody had lived there for years. So we really, the lieutenant relayed that and said, no, this is unoccupied. It's ruins. But it was still denied, and we would have blown it in place and been the hell out of there. And that event never would have happened. But you can Monday morning quarterback stuff all day long. But we had gone from a hodgepodge of people in January, February timeframe to going through the National Training Center and getting certified, to whipping the company into shape as a team, to we all showed up in Afghanistan relatively confident, but really not that well prepared. And I'm watching these guys grow, and I'm thinking we're gonna do this. And then that day I say it's the best worst day of my career, because it's the worst day of my career because I had never had to put my hand inside somebody's face before, and kind of put his face back where it belonged, and just watching one of your boys, one of your men smoking like that was really kind of tough. And then once I saw the condition of Mac, Sergeant McCallum, I said, Jesus, man, I can't do many more of these. That was pretty much the end state of what I thought. I said, we can't have any more of these. Now, little did I know that after that event, when our senior command found out that I was on site when that happened, they were not pleased. And I said, well, what makes me so special? They said, well, you could have got killed. I said, well, yes, we send guys out every day. And they're like, yeah, but your place is back in the fob, making sure they got chow. And I said, come on, man. So I was ordered at that point not to go out on dismounted patrols anymore. And that started kind of a switch going off, and my whole paradigm changed after that. I thought, I'm not allowed to go walk with the guys on the ground anymore. The next day, because of the seriousness of the injury, the commander went out the next 3 days in a row with each one of the platoons, just to kind of help keep the guys grounded. But from my foxhole, everything after December 7th has kind of a haze over it. Because as I said, my whole paradigm was beginning to change significantly. And the last few months I was with the 22nd in theater before I went and took over another company. I just kind of redoubled and retripled my efforts and said, okay, what can we do to prevent that shit from happening again? Because once again, the company did nothing wrong. The platoon did nothing wrong. The soldiers on the ground did nothing wrong. Everything that happened that morning was a success. We got pinned down. Gunner took out the enemy. We got pinned down. Sometimes blew a guy up with a grenade. So everything worked the way it was supposed to. Found an IED. Great. That's the way it's supposed to happen. Nope. You can't detonate it. And that's what kept wearing in my head. Fortunately, both those guys went on to survive. They both went on to do very well. But it was the single, I think it was the hardest day at that point, obviously, for the company, because one event, 2 platoons were significantly affected. But when I got back, there's one memory that stands out in my mind. I got back at the truck and I sat down and I finally drank a bottle of water. I was very, very, very dehydrated. And I saw Sergeant Fuller walk by, the platoon sergeant, and I said, Sergeant Fuller, did you find Max's other leg? He said, no, we can't find it. He said, but I want to go around the building and look, because we were afraid it might have been blown off into the road on the south side. And I looked at him and I said, do you really think it's worth going out there? I said, this is your patrol, this is your mission, but I'm telling you, you're going to have to send your men out there to go find an inanimate piece of an inanimate object right now. And he thought about it for a second and he said, I can't do that. And I said, that's a great decision. Now that's where I also think, if we'd just made one more look, maybe we would have found it. But at the end of the day, it wasn't worth jeopardizing the safety of other people to find a boot, So that kind of wore on the leadership that was on the ground for a little while. But we get back to the fob that night, and reality is just kind of seeping in. All the adrenaline's gone. Everybody's exhausted, and kind of a sick, humorous thing. Dinner that night was spare ribs, and Sergeant Fuller was sitting across from me, and they left me a plate of food on my desk. So I opened it up, and it was ribs. So I picked it up and I started eating the ribs, and I watched Sergeant Fuller turn green and get up and run out of the room. I said, okay, I guess he's not hungry, Then he came back a few minutes later, and I was chewing on a rib bone, and he said, First Sergeant, please don't eat that rib bone. I said, what are you talking about, man? And if you saw the leg wound of the amputated leg, the bone was exposed. So just, it didn't dawn on me because I was still kind of in a cloud. But that poor platoon sergeant, and Sergeant Fuller was a great leader, good guy, never ever gave up, even regardless of how hard things got. He tried so hard to keep everybody safe. I subjected him to more trauma without even thinking about it. Just those ironic, weird conditions. And I closed the container and I set it aside and I said, I'm sorry, Frizzell. You when we just talked. And that was tough. But the next 3 months kind of picked back up. You're talking about resilience of soldiers and why being a hooligan was special. I don't think anybody thought like the Spartan days, or off to war, come back with your shield on it, that kind of mentality. Nobody thought I was going to die over there. It's hopeless. We're all going to get killed. I wouldn't be surprised if everybody knew they were going home with a combat action badge, because of the amount of sheer combat that happened in and around the company. But the next day, I got up in the morning and I thought we were going to have to coerce people to get out of the wire. But I walked up to the motor pool and I watched the brief happen, and they loaded up in the truck and drove away. It was just another day. It was December 8th instead of December 7th. That was the only difference. And as soon as that first truck rolled out of the motor pool, okay, the company's okay. The soldiers are going to be fine. But when I was the only person standing there and that first patrol had rolled out, I had, like I said, I had seen a bunch of soldiers wounded. I had visited as many as I could in the roll too, and I picked up a couple pieces of soldiers out of the bottom of the trucks afterwards. And I remained pretty stoic throughout. But that morning of December 8th, when I was standing at the gate of the motor pool by myself, I cried like a baby. Evidently all the stress from the past 5 months came out, and I couldn't control myself. I was absolutely useless for a few minutes. And when I finally caught my breath, I thought, what the hell was that? But it was really, really kind of cathartic. I needed that more than I knew. And when I turned around and walked back in, there were two soldiers from maintenance that were watching me. And I looked over at them and I waved, and they nodded their head at me. And I thought, oh shit, somebody saw their first sergeant cry. Hope they don't say anything. I'm sure they never mentioned it. They were pretty good dudes. But if had I not done that, had I tried to do the stiff upper lip, I don't know if I'd have been able to continue to be in that position anymore after that day. It just hit me so hard. And once again, not because I ever felt like I was in danger, except for when we were getting shot at directly. I just thought, I've already medevac soldiers, so that was a goal that was gone. I thought we lost 2 soldiers that day. And we'd already had some people drive around route clearance units and get blown up and killed. So I'm thinking, man, I failed at every possible goal I could have had here. That was my mindset at the time. But then after that moment of just letting it go, I was able to recover. And I went and sought out some soldiers and just had some conversations and said, hey, how are you guys doing? Because regardless of how hard it was on me, I wasn't their buddies. That wasn't my element. What you guys went through every single day is what I experienced a glimpse of every single day. And I had that moment where I just had to just drop all the stress and anger and frustration. And it kind of gave me insight. I said, holy crap, I got to spend more time with these troops. Instead of trying to fend off the stupidity so much and protect them, I said, I need to get down in the weeds with these guys. I should have been doing that a long time ago. And when I got down in the weeds with everybody, I realized, wow, they're doing okay. They have each other. And I think that's all that matters. So December was the last significant event that ever occurred with me on patrol, because after that, I was kind of grounded by the senior leadership of our headquarters. They're like, no, you're not going to go out on these. You can go on this one, but not that one, kind of thing, because they knew that one was bad. So I was really frustrated with that. But it kind of rolled forward, and I only spent 3 more months with the unit. I left the unit in early March. And the reason I remember it was March is I went to headquarters company, and then flew home on R&R leave in time for my son's birthday, and his birthday is March 23rd. So it would have been around the beginning of March. And I was sitting in my office one day, and I got an email from our sergeant major asking me to give him a call. So I called him up. That's what's going on. He said, hey, I'm going to need you to come up to headquarters company. I said, well, yeah, we talked about that, when the deployment's over. And he said, no, I need you to come up now. And I was thinking, holy crap, I think things are going pretty well here. And I asked him flat out, I said, you firing me? He said, no, of course not. He said, we need you to come up here. And I don't know if that was because I was showing signs of maybe some early signs of PTSD, or stress. And my PTSD, I think, I'll get into that in just a minute, but my PTSD is really focused on frustration and what I thought was my inability to protect soldiers. We had a company of 147 at our most at our highest, and then after that we averaged about 130 soldiers for most of the deployment, and the company recorded 67 Purple Hearts. So roughly half the soldiers in the company received Purple Hearts, and while the majority of them were traumatic brain injury, concussions, or minor, relatively minor injuries, those are unheard of statistics in modern warfare. I think you'd be hard pressed to find an entire company that suffered 50% casualties. And now there were a couple guys that had multiple Purple Hearts, but not enough to make that significant of a difference. It was roughly 2 to 1. But I was having that was where I started displaying a little bit of frustration with the military. I had mentioned my paradigm was shifting, and I went from, okay, I think we're gonna do okay, to why does everything go wrong when people around us set us up for failure? Why don't they just leave us alone and give us the information we need and let the guys go out and do their damn job? Because at that point, there was not another route clearance unit in Afghanistan that even remotely performed the number of patrols, the combat intensity of the patrols, and kinetic, meaning not just direct fire or RPGs, but the kinetic environment of a highly threatening environment. So even on a lucky patrol where nothing happened, the soldiers still came back from some of these routes and visibly shaking, because the last 5 times they've gone down that route, they've gotten hit. So you can never really turn it off. And I was starting to I'd snap at people, I'd bite people's heads off for nothing. I'd go out and look for fights, arguments. Very judgmental. I'd berate people in other organizations that were complaining about what I thought was insignificant, those kind of things. And that was kind of that 90-day ramp from December 7th until March when I left. That's when things started going a little bit different for me. But when you look at it, I say it's about a 20-month flow. I came to the unit. I'm sorry, not 20 months. I came to the unit in like October of 2010. We deployed in July 2011, and I left the unit in beginning of March 2012. So about 17 months. And in that 17 months, you can carve out 5 months of it as being direct combat. You can carve out really about 3 months where we really got prepared. And the rest of it was assessing, teaching, growing, learning myself, and switching people around, making moves, doing what we had to do. And if I could ever go back and do it again, having twice the amount of time that I'd actually be in combat with the unit to get everything ready to go, I wouldn't have done it any other way. If I had deployed that same deployment with any of the 2 other companies that I was a first sergeant with, I think the results would have been different. Not because the soldiers were ineffective or incompetent or anything like that. I don't think those soldiers would have had the mental toughness that the Hooligans had to get through what they got through. And the reason I say that is it started from scratch when people would scoff at the Hooligans when they walked by. They would just call them garbage, call them castaways, call them, riffraff. So they were used to being independent. They were used to you were used to being independent. You were used to standing on your own 2 feet. And I want to share a quick story. One of these times when I was doing my little walk through the unit, I I ran across this young sergeant who was working on the front of his hood, a hood of a Humvee or a hood of a vehicle. And I said, "Hey, Sergeant Wardell, what's going on?" And I think you had lost probably 10 pounds, and that 10 pounds you couldn't afford to lose on that deployment. But 10 pounds on you looked like 30 pounds on somebody else because you were already kind of a slight guy. And like usual, I think you were cleaning radios or something, some menial task that you did every day. And we just got to chatting, and I said, we haven't talked that much, so what's going on? And you started talking about your son, and you looked like you were on ready to pass out from exhaustion when you were doing your task when I walked up to you. But as soon as you started talking about your son, you stood up straight, your eyes got big, and you were smiling. I said, "Holy shit, I haven't seen this kid smile in a while." So I said, "Okay, we're onto something here." So and that is where that was really, I think, one of the first times we had just a non-urgent discussion. We just kind of just chatting. And then you started opening up about some of the things you're dealing with and some of the challenges you had. And once again, and I keep repeating the same thing using different scenarios, but I'm standing there thinking, man, this guy's leading dudes every day in combat. He's out here, he's cleaning radios. He's all his weapons are clean. They never miss an SP. They're always out of the gate about the right time. They get out there and they find IEDs. They kill bad guys. They do great things. And they're dealing with this stuff back home without missing a beat. And I'm not saying this because you and I are the only two people on the ground. But there are a handful of people in the 22nd that, I mean, it was a great organization. There are a handful of people at their specific grade and their area of expertise. And I haven't had an opportunity to read through much of what's already been said. But I'm going to tell you, you are in the premier group of young non-commissioned officers I've ever served with. And when I say that, you, as a sergeant, I should be counseling you and getting you through your trials and tribulations. And you're sitting there talking to me about, well, when I get home, I want to help soldiers. I want to write a book. I told my son I'm going to write him a book when I get home, and I think it's a really cool. And I said, holy crap, I hope you do. Well, you know what, you've done it. You said that. I think soldiers are going to need help after this, and they're going to need somebody to talk to. Well, you've done that too. So it was remarkable at the time because of all the challenges we were facing then. But when I can pull a little combat leader away for just a second and say, "Holy crap, man! This is remarkable. It's inspiring." And when I felt beaten and broken and worn down about stuff I couldn't control, it was stuff like that that would, okay, cool. The soldiers are all right. They're doing just fine. Okay, I need to go take a shower, eat some food, and start over. So your way of doing that, just off the cuff, like, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to solve. I'm going to build a perpetual motion machine. If you'd have said that, I'd expect it would be on the cover of Newsweek because you'd have done it. And it was inspiring. And then what was the funniest thing, and I told Captain Lau about it a little bit later, and I said, "Wow, man, that's great. I really wish you the best." And you said, "All right, first time." And you went right back to cleaning whatever it is you were cleaning, and I said, "Holy shit, this guy's a miracle." And the reason I said that is you weren't bragging, you weren't boasting or speculating or anything like that, or dreaming. You were just stating as a matter of fact what you were going to do, and you've done it all. And I think that's pretty remarkable. So I just had to get that in there. Sorry. So anyways, it was a tough finish to the deployment, especially considering when I left the company. The battalion commander told me later, he said, we weren't really doing well getting prepared to redeploy. And the battalion commander and I had a really good relationship. And he says, "Hey, I'd like you to come up and help redeploy the headquarters." I said, "Yeah, no problem, whatever." that was the second hardest day of my career. I've said before, it was the hardest day of my career to leave the Hooligans. But I think the hardest day was December 7th. It just struck me that way. But when I was standing, we did the change responsibility late at night. I don't know if you remember, it was damn near pitch dark, but it was starting to get dark, and called the company together and said, "Hey, Sergeant Gordius is out of here." And I said my little piece. It was very brief. I don't remember anything that I said except the fact that I love every one of y'all, and you guys are the greatest soldiers I've ever served with. And then I stepped off to the side. The incoming First Sergeant Brinkley, said, "Hey, I'm happy to be here. And I don't wish him ill. It wasn't his decision to come over." Sure. So at the end, everybody said, "Hey, let's go to the dining facility and have dinner." And I said, "I can't do that." So there were 2 times in Afghanistan that I broke down, and one was the morning of December 8th, and one was after everybody left the motor pool and went to chow. I climbed inside one of the bunkers that were there to protect from indirect fire, and I just collapsed. I said, I can't pull myself out of this. I felt like I had been a part of something so significant. And then I looked down, and I was all of a sudden 1,000 feet in the air. There was nothing underneath my feet, and I just knew I was going to start free falling. I said, "Oh shit!" Didn't last long, I just bucked up and got my stiff upper lip back, and I went and got a bite to eat. But that 90-day ramp of leaving the company set the tone for when I did eventually. And I don't want to skip over too much, but fast forward a little bit. I left the unit after deployment and went to work at staff, and then I went to become a battalion command sergeant major. And as long as I was engaged and I was fighting, I was okay. As long as I'm a builder, I like to work on projects. I don't necessarily like to run systems. But when I retired, when I got to the staff position, I listened to people complain about shit that didn't mean anything.
Sure.
The world's going to end because my latte was cold. We can't do this because people would throw a fit because they ran out of red Sharpies or something. And I started having a problem, and I looked at my chief warrant officer one day, and I cussed him up one side and down the other for no reason. And he just looked at me, and he knew that wasn't me. And he turned around and he walked out. So that's when I decided to seek counseling.
Okay, and I want to pause there. We got 2 minutes, and
oh, shoot, I did it again.
No. Well, I expected one more after this, anyways. What I'd like to do is when we take this break, I would like you to watch a video.
Yeah.
The soldiers had. I just posed a question. What did First Sergeant Gordius mean to you? And they answered that in their own way. And I'd like you to watch that. And when we come back, I'd really like to get your impression of that. And then certainly want to get into the mental health piece and ask you what you think, we being the Army, what we could do better to support our soldiers transitioning back from deployment, getting out, things like that.
Yep.
Okay, and then we'll take a break. I'll send that link to you, and then we'll come back to it.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, what do you think?
I want to preface this by saying, it actually ties in with what you said. You always should look for things that you've done wrong and try to improve on them. Don't make the same mistakes twice. And as I shared with you previously, I always had doubt because I never really got a chance to get any closure with the company. And I always felt like that I had abandoned, even though it wasn't my say, I had abandoned the company. And you just never know. Did you get through? And listening to that. So first of all, Sergeant Palaio, my God, he looks like Godzilla. I mean, he is Martin Palaio, still a beast. And I actually tracked a couple of the guys from afar. I knew a guy that knew a guy that knew a guy that they worked for, that kind of thing. But hearing that is something that everybody should get an opportunity to experience. I don't know. Well, maybe you can because of your profession, and there's nothing you do that you're not good at. So you probably have some insight as to what's going through my mind right now. But it's more therapeutic than you can imagine, because it's been 12 years since I left the 22nd, and that was still I mean, I'm not trying to be egotistical, but Command Sergeant Major isn't something that everybody gets an opportunity to experience. And it's a very rewarding and very challenging job. And I did it for 3 years, but the year that I spent, a little over a year and a half, that I spent in the 22nd, it was still a pinnacle of cumulative experiences. Just because of what I've been talking about this past little while. But hearing that is some of the stories, it just some of the faces. Hell, Barbosa looks like he just walked out of Afghanistan. My God, the kid's not aging. But a couple of the stories, oh, I remember that. I remember that. And pride, pride is not necessarily a good thing, but it is, if it's taken right, I think. There's nothing wrong with being proud of the fruits of your labor, but more importantly, it was the first opportunity I got to look in the faces of some of these young men, and to know that they're okay. I know no one's going to put an IED underneath your feet, tomorrow. So this exercise alone has been good that way. But hearing that positive feedback, and some of the references to not so positive feedback, I'm okay with that too. Because sometimes you don't have to be a nice guy, or you have to not be a nice guy. But the funny thing is, everything that was said there, and I know it's just a kind of a snapshot in time, but I'm someday going to get an opportunity to tell each and every one of y'all thank you. I never had a chance to walk around and shake every soldier's hand and say, hey, you know what? You're fucking awesome. And you're fearless, and you're courageous, and you're inspirational. And that, I never got a chance to tell soldiers that, and my subordinate leaders that. And now you may know what the physical and emotional response is, but I think the long-term effect of that, and I didn't actually get a chance to finish it. I just had to pause it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go back and I'll finish watching it. But it was just a flood of emotion and a flood of memories, and like, woof. So I said, yeah, I'll go back and I'll finish that at a later time. But that 15 minutes or so it felt really good, man. So thank you.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think everybody should get the opportunity to see how other people see them. And I was just thinking, you're having a bad day, you can pull up a cup of coffee and listen to that and see how you feel afterwards.
And what an awesome tool that you just gave me. I appreciate it. And so hopefully someday we'll all be in a convention center somewhere, sipping a selection of nice high-end bourbons, and saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, good to be here. But can I jump into something else real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you had during our previous talk, I shared with you that I had a tough time after, and I did go see some counseling, or seek some counseling. But I sought it like most soldiers do. I went down there to disprove there was anything wrong with me. And I would not have gone down there. First of all, I was a master sergeant because I wasn't a first sergeant anymore, but I was still an E8. And had I not sought counseling, I don't think I would have left the Army as an E8 because I was pretty much out of control. I was angry. I was confrontational and combative. Number two, I don't know if my wife wasn't my wife, if I wasn't married to Terry, there's a very likely that I would not have stayed married. Because same thing, I was picking fights with her for no reason, and she's just like, "What the hell?" So she gave me an ultimatum. She's like, you need to go see somebody and talk to him." I said, "Whatever." So I went down to the clinic and I filled out the stupid form, and I handed the stupid lady the stupid form, and 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 she read through it, and she said, "Well, according to everything that you've got here, you don't have a lick of PTSD." And I said, "Ah, cool, thank you." And I started to get up, and she said, "Well, hold on a second." So we talked a few minutes, and she's making notes and doing her thing. And she says, "Well, here's your answers, and here's my assessment, and they are worlds apart." Now, this is a basic training installation. So she's not used to the PTSD she dealt with was from traumatic childhood, that kind of stuff. Which is brutal on its own. But basic training and drill sergeants typically don't have the same military experience that the combat soldiers do. So she started asking me questions about talk about some stuff. So I talked about some of the things that we've discussed here. Just watching soldiers process through being grievously injured and going through the healing process. Getting shot, that's never exciting. It's not as sexy and glamorous as they make it look on TV. And combat smells a lot worse than it does on television too. And so I ran her through some of my deployments and some of my experiences, and she said, "Oh shit, yeah, you need to take this to your doctor." So that's when I started taking some medication, and I think what the intent was to baseline me out because I was so heavily medicated that I was basically a robot. And I make the comment all the time that if somebody could have walked up and kidnapped my wife in front of me, and I would have said, "Geez, that's unfortunate." Well, probably a pretty bad thing, but I wouldn't have had any kind of emotion because I was so heavily medicated. And then as I came out from the other side of that, I had the opportunity to change my thought process without the related emotion. And it was hugely beneficial because shortly thereafter, I went to the Sergeant's Major Academy, and then I took over as a battalion command sergeant major, and I felt like my old self. There was still a little bit of a shadow of frustration with the way the Army was, but that comes with spending a lot of time there. 30 years is a long time, and you kind of fall out of love with somebody if you're not careful, and you can definitely fall out of love with the military if you're not careful. And I definitely would have fallen out of love with the military had I not gotten the counseling and treatment that I needed. And I think the military is as a whole is doing a heck of a lot better than it used to. The efforts to destigmatize treatment, to destigmatize the asking for help. It doesn't make you a weakling. It doesn't make you a broken. There's nothing wrong with saying that you need assistance. But what I think the military should do is do better at tying it to combat readiness. Call it, mental training or psychological or mental health training or whatever. Come up with a different way to communicate it to soldiers and saying, "Hey, mental health is as important as physical health." Okay, great, but you're telling that to healthy people, and if I put in 2 hours of physical exercise a day to stay healthy, where's my 2 hours of mental health? So it's not really accurate what the military is saying, to a young soldier. And then when you come back and you experience something tough, whether or not it's a poor young lady that's a victim of sexual assault, or if it's a young infantryman who has to shoot a bad guy in the face because he's in combat. or you're holding your buddy in his arms, and trying to put his face back together. You know, whatever your experience is that's tough and you're having a little bit of trouble dealing with. Well, at the same time, you're still physically healthy. So it's really it's a tough circle to run through and make sense of. So I think if the Army, or the military, or even the VA can just come up with a better way of communicating this to soldiers. And I wish I was an advertising executive, you know, because then I'd probably be able to come up with a slogan, but something along the lines of, um, you know, we train every day to be physically fit. But we only ask for help when we need it. You know, something that kind of message. But then, you know, most importantly, there's a badass command sergeant major named Command Sergeant Major Greca. He was the Central Command Command Sergeant Major, and he's very well known throughout the senior ranks, as just a tough dude. You know, he had motorcycle rider, sleeves up his arms, just a badass infantry dude. And he publicly, you know, he went public when he came out of Walter Reed, because he had bottled up and ignored his trauma so long. He was suffering severe PTSD, and he couldn't fake it anymore. So he checked in inpatient and got some treatment, and then he came out and he was very vocal and open with his story. And if we had more of that, or if we, the only time we ever see combat casualties is when a charity wants you to donate on television. And I'll use a couple of our guys as examples. We have one young man, I know you'll know who I'm talking about, who was at the time one of the most seriously injured soldiers, or service members to come out of Afghanistan. But if you talk to Zach Parker today, he's the happiest dude I've ever. He's got a wonderful life. He's remarkably resilient. And then on the same side, we have other guys that went through pretty serious injuries as well, who did the whole bottom, and you can't get any lower, and then fought and scraped and dug their way out, and are now doing extremely well. Those guys, that's our way to save lives. That's our way to, if I didn't have my wife to guide me through this, but I was with one of them, I'd have been okay. Or if I had stayed in contact with one of them, I'd have been able to get through it. So that's what I'm saying. You know, peer mentorship and kind of communicating, tweaking how the military communicates to our combat veterans, and not just combat veterans, but victims of trauma. Because, you know, there are training accidents. There are, as I said, there are sexual assaults in the military still. There are just soldiers that are hazed and bullied and all that aren't made to be, you know, aren't strong enough to deal with that. PTSD comes in all shapes and sizes, and mental challenge or mental health issues come in all shapes and sizes. And it's not just about the combat casualties and the combat PTSD and all that kind of stuff. What about that guy that came from a privileged upbringing that just wasn't ready to deal with the intensity of the military? Why can't that person put out a PSA and they can air it in military communities? You know, that kind of stuff I think would go a long ways to make it more relatable. That everybody knows that young man. I wish I knew his name. The veteran who was horribly burned, and he's on Tunnel to Towers commercials, and he only has part of his hands left. But he's so resilient and he's so inspiring to hear talk. But that's not comparable to a young private that's raped in the barracks.
Right.
You know, so we have the technology, we have the tools, we have the people, we have the experiences, and we have the data. They should just get more broadband with their approach, I think. And then most importantly, I think when a soldier leaves the military, it shouldn't be optional. I think a soldier should do, at a minimum, a cursory psychological evaluation. Whether or not it's a command form, you know, command assessment form, Done not by a young sergeant or a corporal or something like that, but don't somebody of some import, and with some level-headedness that understands the importance of it. And that accompanies the soldier through a screening. We can invest a couple pennies, and I think if the military did that, they would catch some things. Because I think about it every day. My single greatest regret was unplugging from the soldiers of the 22nd when I separated from the Army, and then kind of reconnecting and hearing about some of the challenges that some of the soldiers went through. And I thought, God, where were we? How did we let this happen? And it wasn't my fault. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't that person's fault. If all of us had stayed closer together and done what you're doing now, or what some of y'all have done throughout, could we have caught some of these instances and kept our fellow soldiers safe? I think it's not only the military's responsibility, but we need to teach separating soldiers that, they are part of something, whether they love the military or not. It's not about the military at that point. It's not about the country at that point. It's about the people that you served with left and right. That family will always be there, whether you stay connected to it or not. And I think it's pretty inspirational when soldiers get an opportunity to get together and talk and reminisce and just kind of feel comfortable. So, you asked me earlier, what did it mean to be a hooligan? So I made a little list here just off the top of my head. And we kind of talked about it, but if you cut every soldier open, they bled hooligans. I mean, and hooligans not only meant the 22nd Engineer Clearance Company, it also meant, okay, because rugged was well known for, rugged could mean any different thing you wanted it to. Hooligans started taking on that level of just power. I once saw a mechanic hit his hand with a hammer and say, "Hooligan," instead of cussing. So it made me laugh. So it was everybody identified as a hooligan, whether you were white, black, Asian, Hispanic, didn't matter. And I'm not aware of a single, and that's another remarkable thing, not aware of a single racial issue in that company, unless it was a joke between good friends, which is sometimes off color, but it happens. But every soldier would have walked through bullets to help any other soldier in that company, and I'm confident of that. Fighting spirit. Never there was one soldier in the history of that deployment that told me I'm not going on patrol. And I think given an opportunity to come back and do it again, he'd have been okay. But at that time, he wasn't afraid. He just wasn't ready to go out on patrol. And he ended up not ever going on patrol again because he wasn't fit to continue to serve. But given a chance, I think he definitely would have come back around and jumped at the opportunity of going out. But when you're sitting there getting ready to roll out and you hear about a night, and you don't hear about it, but you actually hear the explosion down the road, and it's one of your fellow hooligans out there on route clearance. It's like, wow, they went down the safe route today. I'm going down the bad route. All right, let's go, guys. That's all you ever heard. And once again, no hooligan, no mission that any member of the 22nd participated in ever failed because of any action of the company, which is pretty damn remarkable, because you supported people in 5 different areas of operation, which is unheard of for a company level. A company does not support 5 different brigades, and it wasn't at one at a time. It was oftentimes 2 or 3 brigades simultaneously. So that just meant, we had to detach a platoon. That means I get to go on patrol twice today. So it's just that indomitable spirit is what made a hooligan a hooligan. And you take 130, 140 of those elements and put them together. I said it earlier, I don't think that another unit would have been able to, first of all, go an entire deployment without a single day with 0 patrols. Now that bears, I mean, Christmas Day doesn't, every single day, an element of that company was on the road. 130 soldiers in 4 platoons over the period of about 12 months, well in excess of 1,000 improvised explosive devices, either detected and destroyed, destroyed by other means, by driving over them, or finding and marking and bypassing to be destroyed later. That's remarkable. 1,350 days. You're talking almost 3 a day. And then when you say that it was about 1,500 patrols and 1,000 IEDs. That tells you the density of the threat. There were vast periods of time where every patrol produced an IED. Every patrol was a troops in contact with soldiers getting shot at. Every patrol received small arms fire, mortar fire, RPGs, recoilless rifle, command detonated a victim operated IED, or just happened to roll up on a poor family that was a victim of an IED. And that happened too. So it wasn't just the combat side, it was just the devastation of the humanity. And then you put all those experiences in a 4th world country, or 4th world environment. Where we were at was some of the most economically depressed people you'll ever run across your entire life. These people had absolutely nothing. No electricity, no running water. They're living in really 4th world conditions. And we're riding around state-of-the-art 21st century equipment, just trying to stay alive and keep them alive. They don't even understand the threat that's facing them. But guys are going out every single day trying to keep them safe. They don't speak the same language. They might not worship the same God. They might not have the same social beliefs. They probably will never even look at each other in the eyes and be able to talk about what color the other person's eyes are. But soldiers went out every single day and risked their lives to help the people that they'll never meet. So I think that's what makes a hooligan. And it was done in a way where I can't think of a single day that I didn't watch soldiers act stupid, just laughing, joking, saying just ridiculous things. I caught a guy juggling hand grenades one day because he was bored. And I said, you probably ought not juggle explosives. I think I said it a little differently than that. But he's like, oh, that's good. I didn't think about that. He was just bored. But you know, he's not a stupid guy. He just so wrapped up in combat that, and I said it earlier, that is the downtime that's dangerous. So you don't, you might not ever want to unplug. You have to have some kind of stimulation. And those are the reasons why I think, Hooligan's special, because of all the characteristics that I named off. But you put that all together in one unit, and give them any mission, doesn't matter, any mission that we received, whether we knew how to do it or not, the soldiers went out and did it. They figured it out, and it was awesome to see, because every time that somebody went out and did something exceptionally courageous, I thought about watching guys draw their weapons out of the arms room 8 months earlier, and they didn't know how to take apart a saw. Mm-hmm. Looking at a radio, and they don't know how to load a radio. And then fast forward 6, 7, 8 months, and you get privates or sergeants cleaning a radio or filling out. I can't remember what the hell you were doing, but muscle memory, because you were so well trained, you were so well versed in your duties and responsibility, and regardless of come hell or high water, you were going to get that radio clean, and you were going to get it put back in your vehicle before you went to bed that night, because a serviceable radio is more important than your sleep. And that is what it meant to be a hooligan to me. And that is what it meant to serve in the 22nd Engineer Clearance Company. Um, it was more of a privilege than I think a lot of young soldiers understood at the time. And I think now, in hindsight, it's pretty clear to everybody how special that year was. And don't forget, I did serve in 5 deployments, so I have a little bit of a reference. And I was the first sergeant in 3 different companies, and I think I served in 13, 14, 15, 14 units, I think, throughout my career. So I saw the good, the great, and the okay. And in 17 months, the 22nd was okay, it was good, and it was great. Yeah. Pretty amazing.
I want to thank you for all of that, and you've answered everything I could imagine. And I wanted to see if you had any final thoughts, anything like that. And then I know you've been with me for a long time. I'd like to talk to you a little bit off camera when we're done.
Yeah, sure. Just a couple of quick final thoughts, if I can.
Yeah.
I just want to look through my notes real quick. Yeah, so there's 2 things. I don't know how many thousands of kilometers were cleared. It was something ridiculous, 23,000 kilometers or something like that. But at zero time did anybody follow behind us and get killed or injured by an IED, that we know of course. But now there were people that drove around, and unfortunately, were blown up.